Victini is technically the first Pokemon of Gen 5, or Gen V if you want to be Roman about it, which might go some way towards explaining its somewhat overbearing V theming. It was designed to be a main featured character in a movie, and it's yet another one of those frustrating FOMO-inducing event-only Pokemon. Although, I gotta be honest, I don't think anyone is missing out on that much with Victini except a high stat line, because this really isn't that much of a design. It's cute, for sure, but in a very mascot-y way, where the cuteness and appeal of the design take priority over almost everything else. It expresses very little beyond just, look how neat this creature is, it looks like a V, and that's just not very interesting to me. It lacks the usual mythical Pokemon connection with folklore or mythology, something that might have lent it some uniqueness or intrigue beyond just being a V-themed mascot for the V generation. Bulbapedia posits that it might be meant to be reflective of the American theming of Gen 5, something like the torch on the Statue of Liberty, or there's supposed to be some kind of apple theming in the character design to reference the Big Apple of New York City, but that is the exact kind of design by committee brand ambassador, brightly colored, sponsor-approved, tedious blandness that Pokemon designs at their best make an active effort to avoid and get away from. Is it controversial to say that Snivy is the best designed Gen 5 starter? Well, that's okay, because I'm not actually going to say that. It's tied with Tepig. A big part of Snivy's charm for me, though, is the smugness which forms the basis for its evolution line. I like that it is just a little bit unlikable. It looks like a little bit of a shit. It is designed to always have its nose in the air and to always be looking down on you just a little bit. The major theme of the line, though, is European royalty, to which end Snivy has that big fancy curled collar, and its coloration suggests a long open coat with tails, with its legs suggesting little feet in boots. It looks like a footman or a fancy courtier or some snooty noble's son. Servine picks up on all of this, extending the collar, adding some lines to the body that imply the shape of a waistcoat, and putting little tiny heels on its boots to complete the dandy boy at court look. Meanwhile, the arms and the leaves along the back begin to suggest something like the ornamental leaf decoration styles which European nobility used for centuries, because they were imitating the Romans, who in turn were imitating the ancient Greeks. That single fold poking up above its head, by the way, also suggests to me at least some kind of fancy formal headgear or a symbol of rank, and all of that continues straight on into Superior. Superior's enormous curled collars sheathe its body in a way that suggests a kind of stately monarch's robes, and the collars terminate in a literal fleur-de-lis design, while the yellow markings on its body and curled green markings around its face even more explicitly evoke those decorative leaf design patterns. The double flaps rising up from the back of its head also gently suggest the shape idea of a crown, although if you were to look at it less generously, those flaps along with the collars also make it look ever so slightly like a half-peeled banana. Either way, the themes are on heavy display here. It looks haughty, it looks imperious, it looks regal, it looks powerful. It is fully on some Sun King bullshit. And I've always really liked that Snivy transitions from a humanoid creature towards something that's more animalistic as it grows in power. That's always felt better to me than Pokemon that evolve from animal to humanoid. Incineroar and Meowscarada! I think, personally, that Pokemon are at their coolest and their most powerful looking when they look like creatures and not people in creature cosplay. Design-wise, I do really like Tepig, but I also kind of feel like it's the weakest link in its own evolution line. The color scheme, to start with, is solid, especially the yellow streak on the black hood on its face does a great job of evoking its fire type while looking credibly like an animal's natural markings, and I do find it adorable that the black markings on its body essentially kind of evokes the shape of a diaper, or maybe just a pair of children's shorts. That said, I'm really missing just a little bit of a hint of the decorativism and adornment that becomes the centerpiece of its later evolution designs. The snout looks more like an electrical plug than a pig's snout, and the big red ball on its tail is a design element that just kind of goes nowhere and doesn't really add anything. Again, it's not that Tepig is bad, it's just the weakest link in a line that is pretty darn strong otherwise. Picknight is a notable step up, introducing the curly decorative flame elements that become fully iconic on Emboar, and very cleverly manages to turn Tepig's diaper markings into something more like a wrestling singlet, leaning into the fighting type even further by adding glove-like markings to the arms to emphasize them. The body becoming fully egg-shaped also adds a lot of visual toughness to the design, with a big wide mouth and visible tusks to really put the gregarious enthusiasm into its design. The tail now also imitates the shape of a puff of smoke, which I think is a nice little detail here. Emboar takes all of this and dials it up to 11, basically perfecting it. It evokes simultaneously some of the wrestling aesthetics of Pignite and the dignified, severe energy you would expect from a depiction of some forgotten Three Kingdoms general. The Chinese inspiration is heavily on display here in the decorative yellow swirls and the stylization on the flame collar and the eyebrows. I've said before that I prefer animalistic Pokemon to anthropomorphic ones, and Emboar walks the balance between those things better than most. Like, yes, it is on two legs with a human aspect, but the giant club-like arms and 3 claws, plus that enormous Muppet mouth fully splitting its head in half, plus the fantastical elements of stylization, all of that together makes it feel much more like a monster or a mythical beast out of some ancient folklore than just a guy in an animal costume. Though I may never ever want to see another fire fighting starter in Pokemon ever again as long as I live, if it evolves into Emboar, I can't be too mad. Ah, the worst designed Gen 5 starter. Mind you, we're grading on a pretty steep curve here. Snivy and Tepig are tough competition, so it's not like Oshawott is bad, it just lacks a little bit of clarity in its design line. To start with, the idea of an otter using sharp seashells as ersatz swords is very, very good. It's fucking awesome, actually, but I think none of its actual designs quite manage to communicate that idea visually. Case in point, Oshawott just kinda looks like it's wearing a baby onesie with a shell design on it, and like it is, the line is based on the idea of a samurai's lifespan, and this is the baby stage of the idea, so it is a baby otter. It just does not properly communicate the idea of the shell as a weapon. It's rendered way too simply, and without that visual communication being clear as a design, Oshawott is just kind of a cute otter Pokemon with no really interesting visual idea underpinning it. Of course, that's pretty normal for first stage designs, and I will say that Duat, the second stage, might be the best second stage design of all of the starters of this generation. With its aggressive whiskers and top knot of raised fur, along with the skirts on its legs beginning to evoke the shape language of samurai armor, and by placing the shells conspicuously on the hips, the place where swords is supposed to go, it finally manages to communicate that central idea, which is so key to the concept of the whole line, and it does so brilliantly. Until Samurott unfortunately kinda drops the ball again. I like the idea of bringing in some influence from sea lions, and I really like the helmet and the giant whiskers evoking the shape language of samurai helmets and battle masks, and I will say, it really does look like the commander of some army barking orders on the battlefield. That all works. But if you looked at this design and I asked you to figure out where the swords are, without any previous knowledge, how would you identify them? The grips of the swords, those sharp triangular points poking out of the plating on its arms, simply do not appear as such. It just looks like part of the armor, which is the opposite of a weapon. It just does not read well from a design perspective. And like, if you're doing a Pokemon based on a samurai, the swords need to be clear in the design. Hiding your weapon is ninja behavior. Samurai show their swords, and they show them prominently and proudly. So with Samurott, not only is it no longer using seashells as swords, which was the cool idea that made the line unique in the first place, it doesn't even really have swords as part of its proud samurai general design. It has hidden blades, like it's some kind of assassin instead. It just doesn't quite work. Hisuian Samurott, by the way, is more or less just the Shadow the Hedgehog version of Samurott. It's a very basic execution of adding a Dark-type theme to a design, and while it definitely looks cool, it's not particularly interesting to me either. The Dark-type does make a lot more sense with the idea of hidden blades, though, so it is kind of an improvement over the original. It's got that going for it. Patrat is the mandatory Gen 5 Rattata, and for my money, it's one of the more interesting versions of the concept. Sentret, Zigzagoon, and Bidoof all went for a baseline adorable cuteness for their appeal, and Patrat, with those red and yellow eyes inside of a dark eye mask framed in concentric circles, is instantly way too intense to ever really read as cute, and the rest of its shape language follows that vibe, with a lot of sharp angles on the ears, nose, and tail, and especially that giant sharpened single front tooth looking genuinely kinda deadly. It all adds up to a creature that looks not necessarily dangerous as such, but certainly something you wouldn't want to piss off or get in a fight with, because good god, imagine how much those bite wounds must sting. It's based on the idea of animals like meerkats and prairie dogs that have a watchful scout, keeping a lookout for threats for the colony, and the intensity of the design works for that. And while, yes, every Pokemon is someone's favorite, I have never really met a lot of people who would say that Patrat is their most beloved, nor do I think that there's that many people people who could possibly claim Watchog either, which is a pity because I really think this design is genuinely quite good. Watchog as a design is mostly just what if Patrat was also Long Cat, but its stern arms crossed posed and extremely upright posture, along with the high visibility vest markings on its body and its tail now acting almost like a signaling pole, perfectly captures the unforgiving energy of an overly stern crossing guard or job site safety officer. I just can't help but appreciate it on a pure design level because the vibes here are really negative and hostile, but that seems to be exactly what it's going for. Like, it doesn't look fun to hang out with necessarily, but if this was my main partner, I would feel secure in the knowledge that the next time a gym makes me battle 9 trainers while surfing down a waterfall that's on fire or whatever, they would get reported and closed down for OSHA violations. The trouble with Lillipup is that it's one of those just a normal animal Pokemon character designs. It's stylized in the Pokemon style, sure, but this is literally just a cartoony Yorkshire Terrier. Its main attempt to bring a fantastical element into the design process seems to be the face mask of hair, which just isn't quite enough to make it anything other than a cartoony dog with almost nothing that says Pokemon about it. Herdier doesn't really change that very much. It's a dog-ass looking dog with only really that star-shaped crown of fur on its face to really set it apart from anything realistic. It does evoke the idea of those little overcoats that small dogs are sometimes made to wear in cold weather with the fur cloak on its back, which I like, but this really is still just kind of a dog. Now, to be clear, I like both Lillipup and Herdier. I think they're adorable, and I love Yorkshire Terriers. It's just, specifically as Pokemon designs, they're just not very interesting. Stoutland, though, Stoutland brings it all back around. Now, we get that crucial fantastical element that a Pokemon design needs by the simple convenience of pushing a mundane element of the design all the way into a slightly illogical extreme. That enormous mustache, contrasting strongly against the fur dark coat that's now covering its entire body, is absolutely perfect payoff, and it capitalizes on all of the traits that the pre-evolutions have been building up. It delivers a creature which looks both powerful and sort of quietly dignified in the way that certain species of dog often do, but also just a little bit goofy in a charming, grandfatherly, slightly magical sort of way. Stoutland is an absolutely amazing evolution and a near-perfect Pokemon design, and I think it fully manages to justify the relative mundanity of the pre-evolutions. It's all set up to get to this amazing payoff. Purrloin is one of those designs which at first glance might not really appear to be anything special, but examine the details and a few interesting design ideas start to show up. For example, the enormous upper eyelids that extend into the triangular ear shapes implies visually that the eyelids are also the inside of the ears of the creature, and this creates a genuinely kind of uncanny fusion of anatomical features that looks completely benign at a glance, but kind of freaky the moment you think about it for even a second. Similarly, the cream and purple markings on the body just look like random fur markings in its artwork where it's sitting down, but as soon as it stands on 2 legs, as it does in its animation, oh, this has the shape essentially of a kind of cat suit complete with gloves, and hey, that works really well with its concept of being a cat burglar or a thief. Of course, this all does make it feel rather like Meowth 2.0, especially after the anime associated Meowth so heavily with thievery, and Leopard doesn't really help matters by also repeating Meowth's evolution pattern, transforming from a standing anthropomorphic house cat into an animalistic big cat. For my money, Leopard really loses the cat burglar idea. The eye-ear fusion trick is still present in the design, and it does look reasonably like a Catwoman sort of mask arrangement, but beyond that, it really just is kind of a purple leopard with not much of a specific concept under it. It's just a big cat with a weird face, and again, a lowland Persian does that concept a hell of a lot better. I've always found Leopard quite pretty, I will say, at least in its artwork, but as a design, the line starts with a half-interesting concept and then just drops it on the floor in a way that's really kind of disappointing. This feels like kind of a nothing design to me. Ah, the elemental monkeys, or as I've always thought of them, we have starters at home. Now, a trio of monkeys is an idea with some cultural heft. The classic 3 wise monkeys maxim of hear, see, and speak no evil, for example, comes to mind, but it's not really clear to me that that's what these 3 designs are really going for. Rather, they seem pretty custom built to support their associated gym leaders and the whole restaurant theme that whole part of the game has got going on. And that's fine, I guess, but it does leave them a little bit adrift as designs. In both their first and second stage evolution, they are basically the same monkey 3 times with different colors and a slightly different affect and costuming. On top of that, that costuming is also really just very basic. In their first stage, they're kind of just wearing hats that look alternatively like broccoli, a water spout, and, well, a turd, frankly, on Pansear's head. And he isn't even unique in that regard, because Chimchar did the exact same thing in his design with a lot more personality and a better evolution. The evolved forms do stand apart from each other a lot better. Simisage, for example, is rocking a weird fusion of a wise old man character and then a greaser with a giant Johnny Bravo pompadour. Simipour looks like it's about to try and sell you on an essential oils multi-level marketing scam, and Simisear just kind of looks like it's just washed its hands and can't find anywhere to dry them. To be fair, they do represent their types okay. Like, I can tell that they're grass, water, and fire, but they're doing it on such a basic, uninteresting level. Again, Monferno and Infernape do everything Simisear does better, and Grookey Thwacky Rillaboom outclasses Simisage so hard as grass monkey designs that it's not even funny. I will say, they're all charming designs. Like, all 3 monkeys, especially when they're evolved, look fun, and there's a nice variety between them that I appreciate. They just do not do anything that's special or particularly interesting. Bulbapedia has it that Munna and Musharna are based on a Japanese style of censer for burning incense to keep insects away, and hey, that's actually pretty interesting. That's a cool concept, and it squares really well with the smoke trail from Musharna's head. For my money, I always felt like they were kind of like the Adventure Time version of Drowsy and Hypno, or maybe there's a little bit of a Moomin's vibe to them. Like, they're the kind of odd creature that Moomin Pop-Up would probably have encountered on one of his many adventures. And as creatures fundamentally of dreams, of the shapeless psychic, a demon of the immaterium, if you will, Munna really works for me. Something about its proportions, that slightly odd hump in its back, and the gem-like eyes and hanging snout, and those flowers painted onto its side in an almost childish way, it feels like the look of an imaginary friend or some strange creature you would imagine in a fever dream. Not scary or nightmarish, but not quite comforting either. It's just a little bit too odd to be truly comforting. Musharna, with the plume of psychic smoke out of its head, continues that vibe, complementing the sleep theme by quite literally just being asleep. Its body pattern also looks to me a little bit like a pajama onesie or a muumuu, something soft and comfortable. I do also like the tiny little trick that's happening here. Musharna is so curled into a ball that you kind of don't notice that it actually has a longer body with arms and legs and could stand upright if it wanted to. And the moment that you imagine this creature standing upright, well, all of a sudden, that gets really weird and freaky, again in a way that feels, oh yeah, like that's something you would see in a dream. And it all adds up to, like, a line which isn't impressive and doesn't have a wow factor, but genuinely, the more I think about these 2 Pokemon, the more I become convinced that they are absolutely perfect designs for a dream-themed Pokemon. Pidove is another one of those Pokemon which is literally just a slightly cartoony, normal animal. Like Hoothoot and Talo and Starly before it, it is the Pidgey of Gen 5, the mandatory normal flying type, but it fits the Pidge name a lot better than Pidgey by actually being a pigeon. And there's not a lot much else to say about it, really. It just looks like a cartoon pigeon with almost nothing to set it apart, specifically as a Pokemon. I've always liked it. There's something about its cheerful energy and round-eyed stare that's undefinably charming to me, but I'm not going to sit here and say that it's anything even remotely exceptional. Tranquil, on the other hand, has a much better go of it, retaining much of Pidove's color scheme, but adding in some colorful face plumage and a sharper expression along with a sharper beak and a peculiar hairstyle kind of arrangement that looks like some kind of curly mullet design, and that's definitely unique. That makes it a lot more interesting. There's a lovely geometry to the way its face is put together as well, with the white crest curling up into the eye and cutting over into red. It's very appealing and a lot more interesting to look at than its first stage. Finally, Unpheasant, whose name I've always felt is rather off-putting, then transitions fully into a different family of birds by becoming, well, a pheasant. Now, sexual dimorphism in birds is a fascinating subject for character design. A lot of species of male bird get absolutely outrageous in the name of attracting a mate, and it makes me wish that Unpheasant's design went a bit harder than it does, honestly. Like, give him a big peacock tail or iridescent feathers, get really flamboyant with it. Female Unpheasant is a really boring design on purpose because the male version is supposed to carry the weirdness, and while I think the line does succeed at what it's trying to do here, I mean, come on, this could have gone way harder on the idea and would have been way more fun if they did. Blitzle and Zebstrika is one of those design ideas that's so obvious you kind of kick yourself for not coming up with it first, because duh, of course the black and white patterning of a zebra is the perfect candidate to be recontextualized into bright bolts of lightning against the pitch black sky. Of course they are, god damn it! And these Pokemon's designs do not disappoint. Blitzle manages to stay adorable by rounding the muzzle of a horse into a big, round, cartoony bulb, and keeps the coloration fairly simple with ribbons around the body rather than lightning bolts, leaving all the sharp, deadly lightning shape language to its mane, which gives it the energy of a slightly overexcited child with unkempt hair. It's very cute. Zebstrika, meanwhile, is one of those Pokemon designs that could fully be a legendary if it went even 5% harder. A pitch black body crisscrossed with sharp bolts of electricity with a mane like twin streaks of lightning arcing rapidly across its spine. Come on. Those sharp yellow eyes with the exaggerated white lashes have a real sense of menace to them. Imagine seeing that coming at you with a crack of thunder behind it. God damn. The one trouble with Zebstrika is that its 3D models have never quite been able to deliver on the sleekness of the artwork. Its stylization relies on a graphic flatness that just doesn't quite translate when rendered in 3 dimensions. Not the only Pokemon that suffers that problem, but still, it is there. Nonetheless, this is absolutely fantastic design work, in my opinion. The perfect mix of a familiar creature with fantastical imagination. I really, really like this evolution line. Much in the way that Pidove is the Pidgey of Gen 5 and arguably a better fit for the pigeon-themed name than Pidgey is, Roggenrola is the Geodude of Gen 5 and would be much better suited to the Geodude name as well because it seems to be based on the idea of a Geode, and it is just a little dude. Seriously, Roggenrola is one of the most just a little guy-ass little dude character designs in all of Pokemon. It just looks like it's supposed to be prancing around as a sentient rock spirit in the background of a Ghibli movie set on some mountain somewhere. Interestingly, though, the hexagonal shape on its face is apparently its ear, at least according to the Pokedex, although in practice, yeah, this is a little walking rocky eyeball in terms of character design. That's what it is, that's what it looks like. It's got an incredibly simple design, which is elevated primarily by that little exclamation point of rock poking up from out of its head like an antenna. It's a little thing, but removing it would change the energy of the design pretty fundamentally, and it would lose a lot of its charm. The next step, Boldore, is a shift in vibe. There is no little guy energy here. This thing looks angry and fully capable of murder, in no small part due to the sharpness introduced to the design by the red crystal shards that are now poking out of its body like claws and horns and spines. It's maybe a little bit sudden as a change. I kind of wish that it kept a little bit more of the trundling cave critter energy that Roggenrola has to smooth the transitions of the evolution a bit. That said, I do think Boldore looks cool. It really does look like a crystal geode that's come to life, scuttling about on 3 rocky legs. It looks like sentient minerals rather than some kind of a rocky animal, and I like that. Which is why Gigalith loses me a little bit. With its 4 legs and much clearer head, body, legs anatomy, and even something that looks like a mouth on its model, it feels a lot more like an animal of some sort. And I don't know, I preferred the kind of inscrutable geometry of Boldore. I preferred the idea of a mineral that's come to life. With its rather squat proportions, Gigalith also just doesn't really feel that impressive to look at. The Pokedex wants this thing to be a thrumming fount of power, and the name wants it to feel huge, but it just kind of looks more like a small pile of rocks than a mountain or a hill. If the head was a little bit smaller, if the legs weren't so bent and crouching, maybe that would help. It's just kind of missing a little bit of that monumental energy. I've always thought of Woobat as kind of Zubat's evil mirror dimension twin, or rather perhaps it's Zubat which is the evil mirror dimension twin, and Woobat is the good one. Zubat constantly haunts players in every cave that they step foot into to suck their blood and waste their time, but Woobat, by contrast, just wants to give you a kiss and a cuddle. Aww. And I mean, if you want to make an appealing design, then what if a cotton ball had wings and a heart-shaped nose is about as simple and easy a way to achieve that as I can possibly think of. Even the sharp tooth in its mouth loses a lot of sense of menace inside of that big, goofy smile, looking a lot more like a baby tooth than any kind of threatening incisor. So Woobat is quite adorable, but it's also not really anything more than that. It repeats Zubat's design trick of having no visible eyes on the model so as to imply total reliance on echolocation, but it also loses out on Zubat's much more concrete anatomy and plausibility. These things are ultimately more emoji than actual creature. Fortunately, Swoobat fixes this quite decisively, clarifying the creature's anatomy and resolving the fuzziness into a big warm fur collar. And while Swoobat remains adorable with its big heart nose and its cutesy eyes and Muppet smile, there's there's also just a slight element of the weird, with that twisted tail that resolves almost into an earwig's mandible shape, not really helped by just how fleshy the color of the thing is. Now, to be clear, I like that. I like the mixture of the extremely cutesy with the almost slightly uncomfortably anatomical, because it's not like it makes Swoobat creepy or off-putting, it's just a nice bit of design contrast. It adds interest. I also really like the parabola mirror shape of its ears as though to catch and amplify sounds. I think it gives its head a very clean, sleek stylization that really works for it. This is ultimately a pretty darn good design. Drilbur looks so much like it was originally designed as a side character in some obscure European children's cartoon that only ever got dubbed into like Slovenian, Dutch, and Flemish, but which inexplicably has a dedicated fan base that produces astonishingly emotional fan art about it. I know, that's a really specific vibe to give it, but I just can't describe it any other way. There's just something about the proportions of that long snout and the cheerfulness of this little critter that makes me feel like I must have seen it somewhere playing on a TV during a family holiday road trip through Europe. It's like it has Iron Curtain era Soviet children's TV vibes. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone else. Outside of that, it's also just a solid little design on its own merits. Those giant clawed scoop arms are a great stylization of mole claws, and the striated color patterns on the body perfectly suggests its Pokemon typing without being too obvious about it. It's nothing spectacular, it's just charming and effective. Excadrill, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a mixed bag for me. The idea is really solid. I like the concept that it clasps its head and claws together to form a drill. That's really cool, and the now more aggressive claws and head do a great job of implying the increase in power that comes from evolving. It really does evoke a kind of tunnel boring machine. And making the third steel claw a helmet also works, at least conceptually. It vibes really well with the idea of earthworks and engineering and drilling and all of that. The trouble is just that the way the head and the metal helmet emerges from the neck makes it look to me like Excadrill is wearing a big brown skin suit that the head is poking out of, or else that its head and helmet are kind of emerging from a fleshy sheath of some kind, which is just not, that's not really good vibes to me. There's something just kind of off about the way that the helmet is integrated into its anatomy, and it keeps throwing off the whole design for me, unfortunately, which is a pity because, again, the idea here is really good. Audino is one of those I cannot believe this is not a fairy-type Pokemon designs like Skitty or Chansey, with its soft pink and cream color scheme and a design that wavers in the space between the anthropomorphic and the supernatural. There's some rabbit traits in the design here, which would make sense for a normal type, but they are completely overwhelmed by the humanoid posture and highly stylized shape language. Audino's theming leans away from the animal and much more towards a kind of guardian angel caretaker character, or a nurse with the curls on its ears acting essentially as stethoscopes. It's all soft vibes, hush hush, I'll take care of you, plush-like gentleness. Which is good, to be clear. I think it's a nice design. I just cannot let go of how much this feels like it really ought to be a goddamn fairy type. Fortunately, Audino has a Mega Evolution that agrees with me. Mega Audino pushes the design fully into the supernatural and specifically into the angelic, ornamenting the design with soft wings and feather shapes and even giving it a white coat on his body, which also emphasizes the medical theme. Audino, in both of its forms, is adorable, comforting, and appealing, and just all around pleasant to look at, which is exactly what it wants to be and exactly what it needs to be for its theming. It's a fairy type. Like, come on, Game Freak, make it a it's clearly a fairy type! I have a real fondness for Pokemon designs that have the guts to genuinely be ugly. Not as a mistake or an accident, but on purpose, as a purposeful act of design. And boy oh boy, the Timber line delivers on this. Timber itself does keep it pretty light though. It has a gregarious little face and a pompadour and ponytail sort of hairstyle on its head that gives it some childish, mischievous energy. The bulging, popping vein imagery that defines the design line is present, but also mostly kept out of the way, wrapped around its shoulders and adding some ornamentation on the hips. It's only the bulging vein triangles on its head that really makes it a little bit off-putting. It also just barely manages to look a little bit like an animal with the black nose and the rodent-like limbs and proportions. Girder, though, makes the weirdness far more explicit, adding more veins and really pumping them up to look inflated, which combined with the huge torso and the tiny waist really starts adding an element of uncanniness to the creature. Add to that the cauliflower head shape and a big red nose, and boy oh boy, that is a weird and slightly off-putting creature. Too human to be animal, but too bulging and inflated to be human. don't think about how much blood is bulging and pulsing inside of those veins. Just don't think about it. Don't think about it. Don't, oh my god, I'm thinking about it. It all comes to a head in Conkeldurr, whose flat old man brows and dark eyes and hunched posture, along with that big tomato nose, really evokes crotchety grandpa who worked in construction all his life. Its veins are blessedly less conspicuously swollen than Girders, but they are also now spider-webbing across its torso in a way that evokes the wiry and slightly shrinking strength of a body that has done hard work all its life and is only slowly aging out of its prime. The line is meant to evoke Japanese cultural stereotypes of construction workers, clearly, and it does so with a very effective caricature. It's ugly on purpose and with purpose, and embodies the concept it is based on genuinely really well because of it. I'm not sure I would ever want a plushie of any of these things, but I really do appreciate them as design. Gen 5 is full of not-so-subtle remixes of or alternate takes on Gen 1 Pokemon lines, and Tympole seems to be another run at the idea of the Poliwag line, with sound as the submotif instead of hypnosis. To wit, Tympole has musical quarter notes for eyebrows, and the bulbs on the side of its head have the aspect of headphones, which combined with its adorable eyes and full-cheeked little smile makes it very cute, and just a little sad or maybe worried looking, and that gives it a lot of people-pleasing child energy. It's a very particular vibe, but it is appealing. Palpitoad, meanwhile, this thing looks goofy as hell. The bulbs on its head lose the aspect of headphones and instead look like, I don't know, a weird set of hats? Bulbapedia has it that they're supposed to evoke speaker cones, but I'm honestly not so sure that I see that. For me, the musical theming becomes now essentially absent, especially with the loss of the eyebrows. It seems to be leaning on the idea that since it represents the middle stage of a transformation between tadpole and fully grown frog or toad, it ought to be awkward and a bit weird looking, and I guess I can see that logic because it is both of those things. Seismitoad, then, is the resolution of that awkwardness into something cohesive, which it tries to do by conceptualizing the bumps almost like a kind of battle armor. It wears them on its hands like knuckle dusters, on the shoulders like pauldrons, and on the head like a kind of odd helmet. It's all about combining the lumps and bumps you'll find on the skin of frogs and toads with their propensity to use loud sound as communication. Some frog croaks sound like loud tapping noises, after all. Then you tie all of that to the idea of earthquakes and seismic waves, and boom, there you go. It's all very cohesive, and by far better than the Poliwag line, even if I do wish that the musical theming could have been kept a little bit more beyond Tympole. Throh and Sawk are the Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan of Gen 5, a pair of fighting-type Pokemon representing unique styles of martial art. Whereas the Hitmons represent the very basic difference between, punches and kicks, these two seem to represent the broader differences between grappling and striking, and so to that end, Throw is broad, squat, and burly, with a design that emphasizes its grasp and solidity, while Sawk is more lean and streamlined and quite a bit sharper, actually. This is classic Red Oni, Blue Oni design, quite literally even, since Oni seem to have been the inspiration for the two of them. And in those ways, they are solid design. They represent their concepts well, they contrast strongly with one another, they are variations on a theme that create meaning through the context of their differences. It is good design work. Except the problem is they don't look like Pokemon, these look like fucking Muppets. These guys want to know how to get to Sesame Street. They are on first name basis with the big birds. These dudes have cousins named Bert and Ernie, and they did a fucking cover of Kung Fu Fighting at the Muppet Theater that somehow involved Gonzo and 45 chickens. It's both that they have Muppet-esque faces and primary color bodies, but it's also that they are wearing clothes, costumes. Like, this is not natural fur stylized to look like martial arts uniforms, and these aren't garments that this pair of wild animals somehow cobbled together from plant roots and tree bark. Those uniforms have a label somewhere on them that says 75% cotton, do not tumble dry, made in Taiwan. And look, Pokemon can look like anything. Hitmonchan also straight up wears boxing gloves, I know, and they are hardly the only set of Pokemon to look uncomfortably human. It's just something about this combination of Muppet-like bodies and clearly human clothing breaks the immersion for me. They don't feel like natural animals or Shinto-inspired spirit creatures. They feel like guys whose day job is to frustrate Kermit the Frog and make cameos on Fraggle Rock. They are not bad design as such, but I think they are bad design for Pokemon. Where many Gen 5 Pokemon feel like remixes of Gen 1 evolution lines, the Sewaddle line manages to feel like uniquely its own thing, and it's largely thanks to the grass typing, I think. Sewaddle itself is very much a standard Caterpie-like, stylized to be cute in exactly the same way that Pokemon has stylized bugs for decades, with mainly the leaf collar to give it an interesting silhouette. I do like that the leaf has been visibly chewed on, though, presumably by Sewaddle. That slight messiness adds a sense of natural verisimilitude to it, I think. Swadloon, meanwhile, is a much more interesting take on the standard standard pupa or chrysalis Pokemon. Rather than being a full shell, it takes on more the aspect of a moody teenager swaddling itself in a leaf coat and moping about the place. It has a lot more personality than your, say, Silcoons or Metapods, and feels aesthetically a lot less like a stage whose only purpose is to wait to evolve into something that's actually good. It has an appeal of its own. The final evolution, Leavanny, evolved via friendship, then becomes a compelling capstone, mixing a round, friendly face with genuinely kind of lethal-looking leaf blade arms. There's a bit of anthropomorphism here too, with the high collar of the leaves and tailed coat and trouser shapes of its body, giving it the vibes of some sort of old-timey upper-class person, but it does this without feeling like it abandons its insect theming at all. It looks cool and distinguished and powerful in a way the third stage bug Pokemon often don't really get to do. It's not revolutionary design or anything, but I think this line is a genuine highlight of Gen 5. The Venipede line is another one of Gen 5's interesting iterations on the standard bug type. Venipede itself is fairly standard, using that familiar Pokemon stylization to make the features of centipedes and pillbugs less, terrifying by simplifying the shapes into appealing, rounded, and curved forms, smooth as plastic. On top of that, though, it also looks rather bullish, with a chunky upper body that looks muscular and tough, and that much smaller, low head at the ground. Compare and contrast this with Weedle and Caterpie, for example. We really get a sense of sturdiness from this creature, which is a little bit weird given how low its base HP is. But what I'm interested in is just how much of a contrast this is with how relatively fragile first stage bug Pokemon are usually designed to look. The really interesting subversion, though, comes with Whirlipede, because this is effectively the cocoon stage of your typical 3-stage bug type Pokemon. But rather than the cocoon being static, slow, and passive in anticipation of the true form evolving inside of it, this is a tire with spikes, which is rolling around looking like it will absolutely shred a motherfucker. It looks aggressive, mobile, and kind of lethal, which is very unusual for the cocoon stage of a bug Pokemon. All of this finally resolves into Scolipede, which again, rather than doing the typical worm to cocoon to flying bug type progression, is just Venipede, but now it's also a horse. It evolves into itself, rather than evolving into something that looks like an entirely different species. Scolipede, though, remains quite interesting in how soft it looks. All of its shape language is rounded, curvy, and voluminous, which is unusual for a Pokemon based on arthropods. There's some influence from slugs here in its belly and face and striped horns, and that bulk, again, makes it look tough and powerful, and given how tall it now is, it makes it genuinely kind of intimidating. Its permanently half-lidded eyes, which are consistent across all 3 stages, could be read alternatively as bored, disaffected, confident, or menacing, but no matter how you see it, what you get from it is a sense of personality. All of this in combination, the softness, the personality, and the real sense of power, probably goes a long way towards explaining the popularity of this line, because it is a striking thing and a genuinely unique take on the 3-stage bug type Pokemon. I honestly don't know how I would improve it, so yeah, I guess it gets an S. Cottony is a simple little thing, just a ball of fluff with a pair of leafy ears. It seems to be based on the balls of shed fleece that you'll often find picked up by the wind around sheep pastures, combined with the fluffy structures that seeds of some plants use to travel and spread by air. It's a solid concept, but there's really only so much Cottony can do with it as a design. It is ultimately little more than an emoji, a disembodied floating face. And given the lack of expression going on here, well, this thing really can't be anything more than just cute and a little bit fun. I feel like something more interesting could have been possible to do with the concept of leaf ears. Whimsicott, fortunately, is a really solid evolution. It retains the fluffy blob base design, but pairs it up now with its leaf ears becoming more like curled ram's horns, and it gains a fully expressive face and a little Blorbo Sackboy body. The Pokedex describes it as a kind of fairy trickster sneaking into homes to make mischief and leave fluff everywhere, and there's a real cottagecore, cozy fantasy energy to that idea, which makes the critter very charming in context. This is a great idea for a fairy-type Pokemon. The design and execution, though, again, I just feel like a little bit more could have been done here. The simplicity keeps it cute, sure, but I keep feeling like the grass typing isn't really being fully used visually, especially if it's meant to be some kind of mischievous fairy. Like, give it something like little wings made of leaves. I don't know. It just feels a bit undercooked. There really is not a lot to pet a little. is there? It's based on a flower bulb, essentially, with the leaves on top being the start of a sprouting and everything below the collar on its neck standing in for the beginnings of spreading roots. These features then also double as the cutesy look of a child in a little dress with a bonnet on its head and a cute and fairly blank and expressionless face. It's effective design and perfectly reasonable as a first stage for a line, even if this thing itself isn't particularly interesting or expressive. It was, apparently, once upon a time meant to be a 3-stage evolution, which I would have loved to see, honestly, because Lilligant explodes instantly from being a precocious child into a fully formed, fancy queen form, and I think there could have been something interesting done with an in-between stage there. And honestly, I think that in-between stage might be Hisuian Lilligant. With its smaller flower crown and shorter hairstyle and greater agility in the figure skating motif, it feels very much like a princess stage that would directly precede the more queenly, settled, regular Lilligant. So call that my fan theory. Hisuian Lilligant is Game Freak reusing the original design for a second stage and making it a whole new Pokemon form. Anyway, Lilligant itself is quite pretty, and I really like how it's preserving the bulb of the flower here with that onion-like skirt that it is blooming out of. I also like just how much leafage this thing has, really adding to a sense of regal extravagance about it. And I do like that the face is still so blank. I like that it doesn't grow a mouth, and that the design doesn't add lashes or makeup or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, I just like how this thing relies on the pure, sheer white face to imply the powdered paleness of old-timey nobility. It's an elegant way to design a queen, and it's an elegant queen in its design. Basculin are kinda scary motherfuckers, I'm not gonna lie. They're somewhat deceptively simple designs, little more than basic fish shapes with some sharp fins hot glued onto them, but the intense eyes and the powerful lower jaws still make them look like something you do not want to spot in the water when you are going out for a casual swim. There's elements in here of bass and piranhas made scrappy and kind of aggressive looking by the sharpness of the stark white fins that outline their designs. It's not lost on me, of course, that the primary color accents on these fish are red, white, and blue, and that their bodies are duller green, and they are introduced in the generation based on the US, and also they have a blue faction and a red faction constantly fighting each other. Like, it's not subtle what it's trying to hint at here. Not that any of this is supposed to be political commentary, it's just a little funny reference in the design. Basculegion, though, takes a decidedly different tack on this, evolving only from the regional Hisuian form and drawing much more from Japanese aesthetics and mythology, as well as becoming just much more salmon-like. The Pokédex says that the ghostly flames on its body are the spirits of fellow fish that did not survive the exhausting swim to their spawning grounds. The red males are driven by the hatred of their fallen kin, while the white females are driven by the sorrow of theirs. Now, Ghosts of the Fallen, embodied by red and white and coming from the sea, sounds an awful lot to me like it's referencing the banners of the Minamoto and the Taira of the Genpei War. These were historical warring factions whose conflict and red and white iconography recurs all over Japanese pop culture to this day. Some even argue that the reason Japan's flag is red and white is the Minamoto and the Taira, but I have no evidence really that the Basculegion designs are referencing this beyond the mere vibes and the coincidence of colors, so I don't really know that this is supposed to be any kind of a reference. It's more of a crackpot fan interpretation from me. Whatever their inspiration, Basculegion are really cool designs, and being fish cloaked in the ghosts of the dead is metal as hell as a concept. In their original form, they aren't really anything that special, but with the Hisuian evolutions, yeah, they go up a grade. Sandile is a cute little critter, and an interesting attempt at an odd type combination. Dark and ground. What does that even look like? Well, turns out it looks like a crocodile which swims through the ground, but which also has a sort of thief/convict theme going on in the dark stripes and the face mask over its eyes, which, whatever else you can say about it, that surely is a unique combination. Sandile is mostly just a cute little baby crocodile thing, though, with the black mask giving its face the impression of having huge eyes, which helps the cuteness a lot, but there's not a lot of darkness to this little guy. He's just kind of adorable. Krokorok has much more of a personality, becoming bipedal, and has a permanently half-lidded expression that makes it look a little bit smug and mischievous. It also gets noticeably more spiky, with spines down its back and sharp claws, which begins to really push the dark part of its typing. The mask around the eyes and stripy body now also really makes it look like the kind of cartoon convict character planning some sort of a heist. Crocodile, though, steps a little bit sideways, dropping the convict angle in favor of something genuinely kind of devilish and a little bit scary. It takes on an angry red coloration, and its eyes sharpen into a combination of an angry expression and almost a devil horn-like shape, while the stripes on its body now harden and sharpen into points, and its snapping jaws grow much longer. In the same way that there's very little dark about Sandile, I think Crocodile loses the ground typing in favor of going all in on dark, which I guess does work with the idea of it now being the crime boss in charge of all the dark dealings of the whole gang. Still, though it works as a design narrative, the creature itself does at times feel more like a Crocorock that just got really cartoon mad and swelled up and got red than a truly unique evolutionary step. I can't help but compare to Murkrow and Hunchcrow, for example. It's fine, I just think it's kind of missing some sauce. Darumaka is kind of an impenetrable design unless you know something about Japanese Zen Buddhism. Which I mostly don't, so forgive me that I'm just kind of rephrasing Wikipedia here. Basically, there's a kind of doll called a Daruma, which is based on an important religious figure in Zen Buddhism, and it is considered a good luck charm to have a doll of this person. But it is also said that the doll has an effectiveness period of only 1 year, so in Japan, at the end of the year, people return their Daruma dolls to the temple where they bought them, where the dolls are burned in a ritual ceremony before the patrons of the temple buy new ones, which is why Darumaka is fire type. Why the Galarian one is ice type, on the other hand, I am genuinely not sure. Outside of the real-world reference, Darumas are just kind of neat little gremlins as designs. Their mouths and eyes have a painted-on appropriately flat kind of look under their huge eyebrows, which look glued to their faces. That's very doll-like. They look curious and lively, which is perfect for the idea of a wooden doll come to life. Darmanitan adds a gorilla look on top of the whole thing, which according to Ken Sugimori is entirely because a designer on the team attended a Daruma festival at a temple which happened to design their Daruma dolls to kind of look like gorillas. And I mean, that's neat, and a wild gorilla is not a bad match at all for the fire typing. The Galarian form, on the other hand, looks like it's wearing a turban, which is maybe in reference to the aesthetics of other regional forms of Buddhism. I don't really know enough to tell, but it also gives it a kind of dignified, pleasantly chill vibe all its own, which is a very effective contrast with the more scrappy base form. The Darumaka line is based on cultural references I'm just not familiar with, so I can't really say how well they work as references, but absent anything else, they are at a baseline fun, interesting, and unique, even if the Galarian Zen mode design looks maybe a little bit too much like it was sketched by a kindergartner. Maractus should just straight up have been the evolution of Cacnea. Like, delete Cacturn from the franchise, this is simply just superior. Besides that, as a design, I get real heartless vibes from Maractus. Like, this looks like an enemy that would appear in a Kingdom Hearts desert world and have an annoying gimmick where hitting it with the Keyblade causes chip damage from the thorns or something. It's a very interestingly balanced design, too. The vast majority of the detail is concentrated on the top of the body, and that top heaviness makes it so that even when this thing is standing still, the design just implies that this thing sways and wobbles with every movement. That, of course, squares perfectly with the Pokédex, which says that this Pokémon dances and sings and shakes its limbs, which rattle like maracas, in order to scare birds away from its seeds. Now, I do feel like it could do a slightly better job of visually referencing maracas specifically. It's just not really clear on first inspection that rattling is what's going on here, but it does look like a planted sort of dancer, and I've always found the W mouth face and the pink, green, and yellow color scheme to be really appealing. This is just a fun Pokémon to look at. It looks like a fun Pokémon to be around. Oh, thank God we have a Paris without the body horror. Dwebble is about as simple as a Pokemon design gets, and we've talked about this formula many times before. Normal animal plus one fantastical feature, that's how you make a Pokemon. In this case, Dwebble is a perfectly ordinary looking hermit crab, which instead of carrying around a snail's shell, it hides its body in a hollowed out rock. That's the fantastical element. But it's an idea so plausible that I almost struggle to believe that there isn't a species of hermit crab in real life that already does this. Like, there kinda must be, right? There's a simple bit of craft going on in the design language where Dwebble's body is made almost entirely of rounded shapes and curves, and that contrasts with the hard, geometric, thick edges and roughness of the shell, and that creates a nice visual balance in the critter. I also do appreciate that it has authentically weird crab eyes rather than going with the painted on and sometimes cutesy anime eyes that Pokemon often relies on. Again, this is something that helps this creature feel almost plausible, like something that could exist in real nature. Moving on to the evolution, Crustle, this is about as simple as an evolution gets. It's the same hermit crab, but bigger, and it's still inside of a rock, but the rock is now also bigger. Still, there are some changes here to make it feel more powerful. First of all, the rock is just now a lot bigger, and rather than a shell-shaped little conch, it is now a literal slab of bedrock. complete with geological striations, the crust of the earth, hence the name. And Crustle now wears that on top of its body, where it almost squashes the whole creature flat. That sense of weight then helps Crustle itself look stronger and more durable for being able to carry it, and there's not that much else to say about it, really. This line takes a simple creature, which feels just barely like it could be a plausible real animal, it ramps up the fantastical features to make it clearly unrealistic, but also way more powerful looking, and bada bing bada boom, that's kinda just how you make a Pokemon. It's unspectacular, it doesn't have a lot of wow factor, and I suspect plenty of people might find it boring, but as craft, this design is, forgive the pun, rock solid. God, I love Scraggy. What a wonderful little creature. Capital C and trademarked. The visual idea here seems to be that of a lizard shedding its skin, hence the way its orange skin turns almost white at the lower jaw, and then back into orange on the loose folded skin that it's holding up at its waist. It looks literally freshly peeled. Besides that, it also gestures at the idea of saggy pants and, according to Bulbapedia, stereotypes of urban youth subcultures sometimes seen as delinquent and confrontational. The Pokédex has it that the saggy skin doubles as protection that can quickly be pulled up as a shield, and it's actually kind of plausible to me that there would be a lizard that had that kind of defense strategy. As a design, Scraggy is a simple work of contrasting shape. The head and upper body is all curves and roundness and quite smooth, while the shedding skin is spiky, baggy, and folded, which makes for effective silhouette design, and the high nostrils and the downward turned mouth on the head gives it a little bit of a personality to work with. The evolution, Scrafty, meanwhile, is mostly just kind of more of the same. It now fully wears its own shed skin as a kind of clothes, but besides that, the only real change is that it's bigger, has a mohawk, and a slightly darker base color, which, like, yeah, that definitely feels like an evolution of Scraggy, but it's such a slight one that to me, this feels like a middle evolution, not a final one. It feels like a halfway stage on the way to something truly interesting, something that completes the implied narrative of shedding your skin to grow up or go through life stages. If Scrafty is a street punk, then I feel like it needs an evolution where it's like a full-blown anarchist gang leader or something at the end. Scraggy is delightful and Scrafty is fine, but I just feel like something's missing from this line. Solosis is genuinely kind of a brilliant little design line. It seems to be based on an odd combination of a living cell and a fetus, as well as the concept of mitosis and the split brain theory, and turning all of that into a catchable battle creature is the kind of weirdness that I love about Pokemon design concepts. At the start, it's as simple as can be, a cell in cytoplasm which is on the cusp of dividing, shown physically by the bulbous shape of its body, which coincidentally also makes it look kind of like a butt. The design uses extremely simple geometry for its eyes, mouth, and that quirky little squiggle on the side of its head, which seems to be meant to resemble a cell structure of some kind. Duocean is the form that comes after the split, but instead of fully being split in two, now there's just a dividing line across its head, splitting its brain in two, with a fragment floating above it and the beginnings of limbs and a body forming. That weirdness then in turn leads to Reuniclus, which is a fully developed psychic super fetus, manipulating the shape and internal structure of its cell to approximate and puppeteer an animal-esque like body, with ear-like protrusions and cell parts approximating the bones of the arms. And I'll be honest, I don't 100% really know how to critique this design, because the concept is so off the wall and the execution is so odd looking and unique that I don't really know what doing this weird-ass concept better would even look like. I think the main thing I do appreciate about this creature is that it remains weird across all three of its stages. It never transitions into something cool or slick or humanoid and adorable. It keeps the weird diamond slit mouth and the, I can't say what it reminds me of on YouTube, split head. It keeps being just a bit freaky, but it does it without ever resorting to being disgusting or gross. It's unique. It's something that you're just not going to get anywhere else than Pokemon, and that counts for something, I think. I have no idea what Sigilyph is supposed to look like. The theory that it's inspired by the Nazca lines certainly makes sense. There is a bird figure in those pictograms that kind of resembles it, but the creature itself looks less like a stylized animal and more like almost something out of absurdism or even cubism, familiar sort of bird-like forms that are deconstructed and reassembled in such a way as to force a visual reinterpretation. What I'm saying is that it looks weird, and clearly very deliberately so. The Pokédex has it that it's a supernatural creature more than an animal, being the guardian of an ancient city that still hovers over the remains today, a remnant of some ancient and long-lost civilization, which I don't know if that actually refers to anything in Pokemon's deep lore, if it's just fluff, but it suffices to invest this creature with a little bit of the mythological to justify its strangeness. And by the way, I don't know if it's just me, but the head or antenna on top of this creature has always looked like an unknown to me. So, you know what? Let's just make that a fan theory. Sigilyph is secretly a paradox alternate form of unknown, or it's a mega evolution that's permanent somehow. That would be fun. Do you think if you spam that enough in the comments, we can make that show up in Google AI search results? Anyway, I like how colorful this creature is, and those colors are actually quite impactful for the design, because without them, it would look genuinely kind of horrifying. Imagine this thing in all black with just the red accents hovering at you slowly in the middle of the night. Ugh, biblically accurate. I love me a good creepy ghost Pokemon, and Yamask is quietly kind of the top of the line. It seems to be based on Egyptian mythology, what with the mummy sarcophagus evolution, and Yamask itself, with its vaguely bird-like form, seems to draw from the Egyptian concept of the soul, which was often depicted as a human-faced bird. The real stroke of brilliance here is the death mask, though, which the Pokédex describes as a depiction of who they were when they were alive. And while I know that a lot of ghost Pokemon are said to be the souls of human beings, there is something especially dark about capturing the soul of a person carrying around an effigy of their own head, and then forcing them to spend their afterlife doing Pokemon battles for a 10-year-old. I think Yamask also strikes a good balance between visual creepiness and child-friendly cuteness. The huge eye with that single tear-like mark at the corner gestures at the idea of undying grief, but it doesn't get totally horrifying with it, which is probably for the best. It's creepy enough just with the mask. Now, the Galarian form switches things up a little bit by carrying a piece of a rune stone instead of a mask, and upon that rune stone is depicted seemingly just the last piece of Yamask's own tail, which raises the interesting question of whether the image is an extension of the ghost, or if the ghost is an extension of the image. Still, the change to a rune stone idea is a fun way to decouple it from the Egyptian inspiration and let it become the haunting ghost of other long-dead civilizations. And while the Galarian form is a little bit less explicitly creepy, at least until it evolves, Yamask is one of those Pokemon which I'm constantly hoping will get more regional forms. Cofagrigus is the evolution of Yamask, and in some ways a little bit less interesting than its first form, if for no other reason than a cursed mummy sarcophagi is such a familiar and arguably overdone horror trope that it becomes a lot less uncanny than Yamask can get in its weirdness. The glowing red eyes and sharp teeth similarly also diminish the creepiness a little bit for me. It's just kind of a little bit too obvious. It loses the spookiness of the unknown and the strange and just looks mundanely dangerous. Still, even if it's not aesthetically innovative, it is effective. The four ghostly arms emerging from the coffin look genuinely kind of intimidating, and those wavy, rubbery shapes contrast really well with the implacable stiffness of the coffin, and it gives it an ominous air, which is perfect for a good classic cursed object. Runerigus, on the other hand, is that how you pronounce that? Runerigus? Well, anyway, Runerigus fucking rules. I mean, maybe that's just the dramatic bias in me talking, but I do love me a good rune stone. Runerigus is most of the time also a disorganized mess, a shattered image held together by dark tendrils. They are puppeteering the serpent head of the runic image and its hand and tail pieces around in a wonderfully poltergeisty way, and the broken image is also just a solid visual gimmick. The creature looks chaotic and messy until you pay attention for a bit and realize that there is order behind the chaos. I do wish the carved image was a little bit more elaborate. The design seems to very deliberately reference Norse runestones and the practice of highlighting their carvings with red paint, and on real runestones, those carvings can get quite complex. Runerigus' art, on the other hand, looks a little bit basic by comparison, and that feels like a missed opportunity. Like, whether it's meant to reference Midgårdsormen or Rayquaza or whatever, the design could do a lot more curling in on itself and overlapping, rather than just be a drawn-out noodle like that. It somewhat lacks the weight of mythology that would really make this come together. Still, what a fantastic goddamn concept we've got here, and what a wonderful alternate take on Cofagrigus' idea. I want more regional forms of this thing, because there's so much world building that can be done with a creature like this. As fossil Pokemon go, Tirtouga isn't exactly the most interesting. Compared with the weirdness of Lillipup or Anorith or Kabuto, ultimately this is just kind of a sea turtle. Which, like, yeah, sea turtles have been around for like 150 million years, so it makes sense that it would be a fossil Pokemon, but sea turtles are also around, like, now, and look really familiar and contemporary and normal, so Tirtuga just doesn't feel odd or offbeat or weird enough to be a fossil from the deep prehistoric past. It's just a blue turtle with a sort of beak mask on its face and some weird circular depressions in its shell that don't really seem to have a function or mean anything. And I don't want to be too negative, Tirtuga is fine as a neat little turtle Pokemon, it just doesn't feel like a fossil to me. Caracosta fares better on that front, emphasizing the mask on the face with a construction that reminds me a little bit of a Dunkleosteus. It adopts a bipedal gait with rock-like knuckles on its flippers and a shell whose design looks a little bit more bone-like, almost like a spine and ribcage. And this strangeness finally imbues it with a little bit of that living fossil from a deep past kind of vibe and makes it look properly scary to boot. Like, this is something you absolutely don't want to encounter taking its first steps out of the water and up to conquer the land and become the dinosaurs. I really like Archon, but I'm less a fan of its evolution. The line is fairly clearly based on Archaeopteryx, which used to be thought to be the oldest evolutionary ancestor of birds, and it's one of the species which has popularly been represented as a feathered lizard kind of creature, a link between the scaly lizards we imagine dinosaurs to be and the modern birds that they evolved into. Paleontologists, please sound off in the comments with your favorite feathered ancient dinosaur, by the way. Archon takes off from that idea, presenting with a kind of scaly lizard's head and tail complete with sharp little dino teeth, and then dressing itself up in a fuzzy and slightly primitive-looking feather coat in bright colors. It's adorable, it's a little bit weird, it's a little bit awkward, and it makes for a great fossil Pokemon in my book. Archaeops, on the other hand, well, it tries to continue the idea of being a sort of lizard-like bird dinosaur with feathers, but I'm sorry, this looks like an earthworm in a chicken costume. The smooth, almost jawless neck and head with that green ridge of scales on top of it, and then the segmented red tail poking out of the back just looks utterly divorced from the rest of its body, and its dinky little separated wings and incomplete feather coverage just looks weird and awkward on this dumpy flapping sack of an animal. Archon had a much stronger and much more bird-like structure to its body morphology and much bigger wings relative to its body, but Archaeops just doesn't look like a thing which can fly. It barely looks like it could flap to help it jump. I just don't think it works. Trubbish is one of those Pokemon that kind of divides the fan base, because Trubbish is trash. Like, literally, this is a trash bag, which is also a Pokemon. Now, Pokemon has always operated with a sort of Shinto-inspired idea that non-animal objects can be ensouled and become Pokemon. Think of Baltoy or Bronzong or the Rotom forms, but in the past, these things have usually been connected to ghosts and psychic powers. Gen 5 is the first generation to really lean into the idea that even the most everyday human mass-produced mundane object can be or become a Pokemon with no supernatural interference required. And that is a change in the aesthetic and approach of the series, and one which it is valid to dislike. I myself have a pretty strong preference for Pokemon as animals and spirits, and I want Pokemon catching to be a journey to explore the natural world as an escape from the human-built environment. But that's just me. Things change, and there are only so many animals available that you can turn into an interesting Pokemon, so something like Trubbish was probably always inevitable. As a design, Trubbish is unremarkable, but also nothing terrible either. I do like its little piranha teeth and ears shaped like the knot of a trash bag. That gives it some personality, but I don't know that I like the arms being made of trash bursting out of the seams that much. Like, I feel like a hole in the trash bag should be an injury to this creature, not a limb. While I don't mind Trubbish, though, I really don't care for Garbodor or its Gigantamax form. Garbodor is an overstuffed trash bag that has burst its seams, but with its mono-colored rock gray body, it just looks like, well, sand with some multicolored rocks in it. It feels like censorship, almost like they're too scared to actually make it gross, but being gross would at least make it interesting. If it is meant to be a representation of city pollution, it really ought to look the part. It ought to be made of cardboard and tin cans and clumps of rotten food. It ought to be disgusting. Even within the limitations of being a child-friendly creature, it should at least feel as gross and toxic as muck does. This design is way too safe, and it kind of kills the idea. It is too palatable. Make this thing disgusting, and then I'll get interested. Zorua and Zoroark are what I affectionately refer to as movie-ass Pokemon. They were the first Gen 5 Pokemon to be officially revealed to the public, and they were revealed by the means of what else but a Pokemon movie released 2 months before the release of Black and White itself. Thus, Zorua and Zoroark are designed to be movie characters with a particular eye towards appeal, cuteness, and coolness. They are designed, at least in part, to meet the needs of the narrative of a movie. So, Zorua is an adorable little fox pup with a dramatic red and black color scheme, highly expressive eyes, complete with dot eyebrows, and an almost human-looking mouth, which allows it a lot of movie character expressiveness. And it is appealing. I've always liked it. It's a very well-crafted children's movie character. As a Pokemon specifically, on the other hand, it just looks a little bit too much like someone's persona and not enough like some kind of animal or spirit or part of the Pokemon ecosystem. I feel somewhat similarly about Zoroark, but I do think it acquits itself a lot better as a Pokemon. I really like the Kabuki mask-style decorations on its face. Those are very cool, and in combination with the more animalistic body and face, it now does manage to look credibly like a dark and mischievous spirit creature that conjures illusions in the night. So let's call the originals a grade of B and talk about the Hisuian forms instead, because I really fucking love the Hisuian forms. At the baseline, this is just a color palette swap from black and red to white and red, but the addition of the odd, undulating ghost energy tendrils transforms Zorua from a cute little movie protagonist into something that's just a bit disquieting and weird, something that's apparently cute but has a hint of the sinister, the kind of creature that you would see walking through the snow and instantly understand that it is an omen of death. It becomes creepy all of a sudden, even in spite of being cute. And if Zorua is an omen, then Zoroark is the doom that you were warned about. This sharp, yellow-eyed monster with a wild mane of ghostly tendrils whose very body seems blistered with angry red veins. It's horrifying. Hisuian Zoroark looks genuinely kind of off-putting and scary. It's not quite a horror monster, it's a little bit too cartoony, but imagine this thing rendered realistically, and now imagine seeing that come running at you in the silence of a pure white snowy night. This might genuinely be one of the best monster designs in the Pocket Monster franchise. Gothita feels like an attempt to do Jinx, but less horrible, and that's a low bar to clear, so mission accomplished, but I'm not a huge fan of the baby form. It's clearly made a bit odd on purpose, with its squishy proportions, onion head, and weird clamshell mouth. It seems to be going for a kind of ugly baby charm, where the weirdness is offset by its childlike proportions, and your mileage may vary on how well that works for you, but I just kind of see it as a 5-year-old in badly applied makeup, and it feels weird. Gothorita comes off a lot better, in no small part because its taller body now allows for the white bows that form a central pillar of its color scheme to fit better on its body and create more of a pattern. The hair buns on the side of its head also gives it a little bit of that air of intentionally impractical fashionability that characterizes certain kinds of goth fashion. I think its oddly rubber-like body and fingerless flipper arms are still off, like they feel like the absence of an idea more than anything, but it's definitely starting to make more sense as a design. Which leads us to Gothitelle, which not only completes the evolution into something that is the shape of a monumental evening gown, complete with a ludicrously impractical hairstyle and that fan of discs attached to her head, but it's also a character design that takes on something of the vibe of a high priestess, almost. She looks so stylized and ceremonially impractical that it evokes the ritualized or the religious to me a little bit. And given that the Pokedex says that Gothitelle's psychic powers have let it peer so deep into space that it has seen the end of all existence, maybe that's appropriate, actually. The disc structures on its head also remind me a little bit of an antenna or a satellite dish, which supports the idea of them as stargazing psycho-astrologers. The geometric layered cone shapes of Gothitelle's dress also work quite nicely with the rest of her shape language. There's nice contrast there, and it's certainly a lot better than the weird rubber vacuum form vibe of Gothorita. I don't know how much I like the designs on this evolution line, but I do find all of them interesting, and that does count for a lot. Minccino is... well, it's adorable, number one. It's very cute, it's charming, and it's very appealing. And it is an example of that classic Pokemon design philosophy, normal animal plus fantastical feature equals Pokemon. It's just that in this case, the fantastical feature is basic anthropomorphization. Minccino is based on a chinchilla, but it's been given human-like posture and more baby-like proportions, with the size of the ears especially being played up here. And that's fine, and given that it's a normal type, it probably doesn't need to be too over the top, but I do just find this one kind of boring. Like, maybe it's the flat gray color scheme, maybe it's the mascot proportions and the very basic appeal to cuteness above all else, but I just cannot find it in me to find this character design interesting. Real chinchillas have these gorgeous mottled fur patterns and distinctive faces, and I just feel like something a little bit more interesting could have been done here. So, Cinccino to the rescue. The evolution recognizes that something was kind of missing and gives the critter a magnificently long flowing hairdo. This plays the role in the silhouette of being both scarf and tail, and it is shaped almost something like a cute little bow that's tied around it. Cinccino itself also gets even more mascot-like in its proportions and loses the scruffy fuzziness of the pre-evolution in favor of going all in on a sort of ultra-soft elegance idea. And that does push it over the line for me. It's a fantastical creature that now actually feels fantastical rather than just kind of mundane and boring. The pure white in the color scheme now acts as a good highlight for its otherwise pale gray color, and it gets to stand out. The first stage is just cute. The evolution is cute, and it gets to be interesting. Ducklet! Now there's a Pokemon whose lunch got eaten by Quaxley. Ducklet has the problem that some Pokemon do, that it is functionally indistinguishable from just being, a normal animal, stylized in a cartoony art style. Pokemon design at its best rides the thin line between being plausible as an animal while still clearly being somehow fantastical, and Ducklet just isn't fantastical. It just looks like a blue duck. The idea seems to be that the fluffy pants that it's wearing approximate the shape of a swim belt or something to that effect, but to me it just really looks like normal feathers. The evolution, Swanna, comes off a lot better, mixing the look of a mute swan with the long beak of a heron, and adding a little bit of personality with a judgmental hands-on-hip pose, and oddly, what essentially looks like a blue feather bra on its chest. Swanna, unfortunately, is also one of those Pokemon that got absolutely hosed by the transition to 3D, because the games defaulted to all flying Pokemon having flying animations, and that killed Swanna's pose and robbed it of half of its personality. Setting that aside, in its actual base design, Swanna manages a really nice balance between looking gracefully swan-like and looking kind of campy and over the top with some good personality, and it makes for an honestly really nice design. Which leads me to a niggle that I have. We have a duck that evolves into a swan, and that has to be a reference to the Ugly Duckling story, right? Like, if this isn't happening on purpose, then that's a really dumb thing for Game Freak not to notice that they were doing. But if it is on purpose, then Ducklet also has the additional problem that it really ought to be a lot uglier and less appealing and less cute, because right now, as it stands, the reference to the Ugly Duckling just doesn't work. And sure, maybe they weren't trying to reference the Ugly Duckling, but if you make a duck evolve into a swan, that's how a big portion of humanity is inevitably going to interpret it, and failing to account for a very common interpretation of what you're doing is also bad character design. Vanillite, to me, is sort of a kind with Trubbish, being a mundane, mass-produced, human-made commercial object which is here conceptualized as a Pokemon. In this case, it's several versions of a soft-serve ice cream cone. The Pokédex has it that these are born from icicles that are bathed in energy by the morning sun, which is quite poetic, and positions them as a kind of fae-like magical nature spirit rather than animals shaped by evolution, which, I mean, okay, but that still feels a little bit at odds with the whole ice cream idea. And Vanillite itself is also not much of a design. It's a very small ice body with a big round head and essentially a Dragon Quest slime face to go on it, which definitely makes it cute, but it's the emoji territory of character design that we're working with here. It's just kind of a floating head. I will say that the blob of ice on top of its head could do with a little bit more geometric sculpting similar to soft serve ice cream, because as it is, it does kind of run the risk of looking like a turd. Vanillish is where the design really starts to take shape, fully taking on the shape of a cone and evoking the idea of ice cream with candy or nuts in it or something. And Vanillish also looks a lot more like an icicle in this shape, with secondary smaller icicles poking down from its body. Designer James Turner has commented that he wanted this creature to be cute, but also a little bit creepy in the way that commercial product mascots sometimes are in their glassy-eyed cheerfulness, which, okay, sure, I can see that, and I guess that's why Vanillux becomes this melted-together gestalt creature with two faces. It's all very cute and adorable on the surface, but I guess you could interpret it as a kind of body horror if you wanted to. Vanillux, though, mostly just wants to be a big indulgent deluxe ice cream cone, complete with a double helping of ice cream and a wafer stuck in it. And, like, much though I want to be generous and try and see where this design is coming from, I just don't like these as Pokemon designs. These just don't feel like creatures that you could go out into the world and explore and find them in their natural habitat. Even Trubbish manages to feel like you could encounter this little gremlin creature if you went exploring at the trash dump, maybe, but the Vanillite line just feels like you have to buy it in a box of 6 at the supermarket. If the design had committed more to being icicles instead of ice cream, maybe that would have worked for me. Maybe it would have had that vibe of being an expression of the world rather than just an expression of commerce, but yeah, no, this design is just an ice cream mascot. Deerling is a lot better in concept than it is in execution. It is classic Pokemon design, the formula that we've discussed many times before. Normal animal plus one fantastical feature equals Pokemon. In Deerling's case, the animal is a fawn whose fantastical feature is a flower on its head and a color-changing coat. The idea is that Deerling changes with the seasons, mirroring both the foliage of the natural world and the way that real-life animals change their appearance to match the seasons. And that is a really good concept. It's a really fun way to draw that connection to nature and implement it into a grass type. In practice, though, this is just a palette swap. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, they're all physically identical, they just change their colors a little bit. And that's kind of anemic, honestly. Like, at the very least, give it a different flower on its head for each season, or let the flower wilt and fall off in winter. The natural world changes radically with the seasons. That's the cool thing about it, but Deerling really can't match that. Thus, the evolution Sawsbuck, which does a lot better on that front. Its antlers now are tree branches, and they do change with the seasons, going from flowers to a crown of leaves, then wilting leaves, and then bare white branches. And its coat and its patterns change too, and in interestingly symmetrical ways. Spring and autumn have identical coats and patterns, same socks on the legs, same puffy chest, same shape of tail, and etc. And then summer has a sleeker coat with no socks and a perkier tail, while winter has a huge puffy white coat and heavy furry socks on the legs. And this works a million times better as an expression of the seasons than Deerling does, and it is much more expressive of the way that animals change with the seasons too. It is really solid, immediately readable design, and it doesn't hurt that Sawsbuck just straight up also just looks pretty cool, very much embodying the proud, upright bearing of a romanticized stag. Pokemon unfortunately largely abandoned seasons as a mechanic after Gen 5, which is a real bummer for Sawsbuck, but it got to have a really cool design idea while it lasted, and they did bring back the seasonal forms in Scarlet and Violet, finally tying them to individual geographic areas instead of the time of year. Hey, sorry to interrupt the bad Pokemon opinions, but this nonsense is somehow technically my job, so I need to do a bit of self-promotion for a minute. If you would like to, you can become a member of this channel to get early access to everything that is uploaded to it. There will usually be between a week and a month's worth of shorts in early access just waiting to go live, and if you want to see them before anyone else does, a membership starts at $1 per month. It will also give you access to the channel Discord, as well as early access to my main channel videos and a few other things. That is available if you want it. Rather than giving money to me, though, a more useful way to spend it is to donate to Doctors Without Borders or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Even a few dollars can do a hell of a lot of good in their hands, and I am not struggling for rent at the moment, so whatever money you give me, there's a good chance I'll be passing it on to them anyway, and you might as well cut out the middleman. Outside of that, check out my other channels. I do Let's Plays, I do yappy reaction videos that are 4 times longer than the thing I'm reacting to, and I do video essays sometimes. Maybe some of that will be entertaining to you, and I love to entertain. But that's it, I am done promoting, and I'll let you get back to the compilation. For every generation, there must be a Pikachu. There must be an adorable electric rodent. But in Gen 5, the franchise finally innovates on the idea by remembering, oh right, you can have more than one type on a Pokemon. Enter then Emolga, the sky squirrel Pokemon, seemingly based on flying squirrels and marsupials like sugar gliders. And you know what? Yep, I'll give it to Gen 5. This does work. Emolga doesn't feel like just an attempt to do a Pikachu again. It feels distinctly like its own kind of creature, and it feels interested in playing with the distinct characteristics of flying mammals for their own sake. This is helped by the ears being big and round rather than the pointy ovals of previous Pikachu likes, and it's also helped by the substantial change in silhouette created by its flight membrane. It still has the modern Pikachu face with the big round eyes and the pinprick nose and the very human-like chibi expressiveness, and it still has the Pikachu cheek pouches, which are still the source of its electrical abilities, which, come on guys, come up with a new idea here. But Unlike the mostly monocolored Pikachu, Emolga has a black, white, and yellow color scheme where the back is kept almost completely dark, and the colors are concentrated on the belly and inside the flight membrane. This creates a nice dynamic contrast on the creature in its color scheme, almost making the flight membrane look a little bit like an overcoat that the thing is wearing, which I think is very cute. Emolga is to Pikachu as Pidove is to Pidgey and as Patrat is to Rattata. It's an obligatory kind of Pokemon. It's a part of the format. It's something you just have to have with every generation. But honestly, of all of the Pikachu-like designs, I might like this one the best. Karrablast and Shelmet is a duo that kind of has to be discussed together. They are a trait evolution pair, which is to say that they can only evolve when they are traded specifically for one another. And this is a gimmick that makes a lot of sense for a series that wants to encourage people to buy both versions of their game and trade them with each other. But to my knowledge, it's a gimmick that has only ever been used this one time. On their own, they are entirely unrelated creatures. Karrablast is designed after a beetle, while Shelmet is based on snails. But according to Ken Sugimori, in an issue of Nintendo Dream, Karrablast is specifically based on a snail-eating species of beetle. Hence, when they are traded, Karrablast steals Shelmet's Shelmet and wears it as an armor, becoming Escavalier, while Shelmet, now helmetless and unprotected, becomes ninja, I guess? Or maybe more like a dark Kamen Rider-style wandering hero, actually. That kind of makes more sense with the name. Again, according to Ken Sugimori, the idea here is that Shelmet is sulking after losing its helmet, hence why it gets all broody and edgy, which, I mean, okay, I guess. The trait evolution pairing is an ingenious little gimmick, I will give it that. It's the kind of surprise that if it was kept secret from the players and you stumbled on it by accident, that would be genuinely kind of mind-blowing, even if that's no longer possible in the age of the wiki. And there is a sort of identity theft thing happening here, too, where Escavalier looks like it really should be Shelmet's evolution, but Karrablast has basically stolen the evolution along with the shell, which I will admit that's fun, but it's all gimmicks, and I find myself really split on whether I like any of these designs as designs. Like, Karrablast itself kinda just sucks. It's the most basic possible beetle Pokemon design, being just a beetle mascot costume with a face poking out of it. Like, yeah, it's designed kind of after a snail-eating beetle, but if its whole thing is identity theft, stealing an evolution from another Pokemon, then something in its design should maybe have thievery themes, or look avaricious, or look hungry, or something. Like, something should point towards that idea. Shelmet, on the other hand, is moderately interesting on its own, with the idea of replacing a snail helmet with knight armor. That's fun, and Escavalier would be a really solid evolution developing that idea for Shelmet. But Escavalier is stuck with a blue and yellow beetle in the middle of its design, mildly clashing with its color scheme, and then Axelgor just kind of feels like a non sequitur to the whole thing. Like, it doesn't follow up on Shelmet's knight themes, and it doesn't inherit any aesthetics or themes from Karrablast to make the exchange symmetrical, so it just feels kind of disconnected from everything else that's going on. I don't know, man. Like, these two have a really compelling gimmick, but the designs that result from that gimmick just feel messy and poorly connected as a result. The whole feels like it's less than its parts. Fungus is essentially the Voltorb of Gen 5, the Mimic. It is a Pokemon whose gimmick is that for some reason it looks like the most popular and iconic object in the Pokemon world. Now, why, evolutionarily, a creature would evolve to look like this is anyone's guess, but my personal theory is that they evolved that way specifically to attract humans so they can infect them with fungus spores, and then when people die from the poisoning, new fungus can be born from their corpses. The Pokédex says that they do it to prey on Pokemon, but clearly that's a cover-up by the government. Why would any Pokemon want to go towards a Pokeball? Anyway, as designs, they are fairly basic, literally just a generic mushroom with a Pokeball pattern on it, and a little kissy mouth, and eye slits, and perfunctory arms. There's really very little to them. The Mimic gimmick is basically 99% of the design, and whether or not you're taken in by that, well, that's up to you. Among Us, being the evolution, is very much second verse same as the first. It is fundamentally barely different from its pre-evolution, except for getting a slightly more disgruntled face, and now it has a pair of extra caps that it can wiggle around for whatever reason. This does make it look more powerful, certainly, but not really any more interesting. Frillish, a textbook demonstration of baby's first sexual dimorphism. See, because the boy one is blue, and his tentacles are sharp, and he has sharper markings, but the girl one is pink, and her tentacles are soft, and they're frilly, and they're pretty. I make fun, but jellyfish as a group of organisms are rarely at all sexually dimorphous. They are, however, some of the most physically diverse and weirdest organisms on planet Earth, and exist in an absolutely astonishing range of shapes and colors. So if you're taking inspiration from those animals and the best you can come up with is blue is for boys and pink is for girls, I'm gonna say that you're wasting some design potential. Anyway, those complaints aside, Frillish are a pretty cool concept, being water and ghost types, playing into the inherent horror associated with the infinite dark of the deep ocean. And their designs do communicate that ghost typing. They have essentially the silhouette design of someone wearing a white sheet, like in a classic ghost costume. And their wobbly shapes look floaty and weird, while their strange glowing eyes are just inherently a little bit creepy. It works. The Jellicents, meanwhile, take things in a much more royal direction. Their Pokedex entry still reads, absolutely terrifying, the fate of the ships and crew that wander into Jellicent's habitat, all sunken, all lost, all vanished. But I think that sense of ghostliness and creepiness has rather left their design at this point. With their massively inflated heads and giant inner tube mustache or big soft kissy lips, these things just don't exactly look like the embodiment of the dangers and horrors of the perilous sea. They look like bobblehead mascots on someone's dashboard. Now, they do look adorable, like adorable versions of a jellyfish king and queen, and I do find their designs tremendously appealing, but yeah, they're not really doing a great job repping their ghost type anymore, and they don't quite feel like natural progressions from Frillish to me either. My conspiracy theory is that the fact that Alomomola doesn't evolve from Love Disc is some kind of programming error that Game Freak made 16 years ago and have just been too embarrassed to go back and fix it ever since. This is essentially the Chansey of the sea, being themed around care, healing, and love, hence the soft pink color and the femme makeup look, because Pokemon as a franchise is just weirdly conservative about gender like that sometimes. It is based obviously on the ocean sunfish, scientific name Mola Mola, with the primary aesthetic innovation here being to make the fins kind of frilly and soft and goldfish-like, rather than the thick bony fins of the actual sunfish, which does give this critter a much more friendly and soft-looking appearance than its lumpy real-world inspiration. The eyelids, designed like they're hooded with heavy makeup, along with the eyes themselves being distinctly human-like, also invest the creature with a certain sense of intelligence, which does distinguish it, but none of it manages to make it interesting, really. It's a stylized sunfish with cuter fins, and that's really kind of it. The medical and nurturing themes might have been interesting to explore visually beyond just make it pink and feminine, but, well, I guess it wasn't in the cards. We've talked many times about how Pokemon stylizes its bugs to make them appealing rather than horrifying, and Joltik is a prime example of the art. It's a spider, but only in the very vaguest visual sense of the word, having been fluffed up to be an adorable little squishmallow of a thing with big eyes and a body defined entirely by scruffy, furry softness. Even the mandibles at the front of its face look like they'd be ticklish to the touch. And it's all in service of the typing, too. The spiky, fluffy fur is all about evoking the imagery of static electricity, and it does work very successfully. Like, I don't think anyone needs to be told that this Pokemon is electric type. Even in grayscale, without the yellow color, that kind of comes across. Galvantula, meanwhile, necessarily loses some of the adorableness in order to look more powerful, gaining the extra pedipalp front legs and a much, much more spider-like body plan. I don't think anyone's arachnophobia would be triggered by Joltik, but Galvantula is definitely edging up towards it. It retains the fluffy, furry imagery in parts, and the electric type implication that comes from that is intact, although the dark, random diaper of fur that now sits on its abdomen feels weirdly unmotivated and unbalanced to me. It does add some contrast to the design, which is arguably necessary, but it looks weird and messy in execution, and I really don't think it adds anything to this creature. It's a solid design generally, but that fur diaper kinda baffles me. Ferroseed is an egg with spikes on it. Basically, there's not a whole lot more to it, at least not from a design perspective. It seems obviously based on plants like the cockleburs with their sharp spiny seeds that stick to everything, and as a Pokemon representation of that kind of plant, they are, I guess, fine. The only really distinguishing feature they have are their eyes, which are surrounded by half hexagons, which do add a little bit of geometric oddness to their look. But yeah, outside of that, they're just kinda eggs. Spiky eggs. The evolution Ferrothorn, though, gets a lot more interesting and weird with it, taking on a football shape and extending freaky, alien-looking needle pods from the top of its head, with which it hangs from cave ceilings to shoot spikes at prey below. It remains barely plausible as like kind of a weird plant or fungus that you might find in nature, but honestly, it much more resembles to me something that Samus Aran might fight as a mini-boss in a Metroid game. What was an immobile and mostly uninteresting spiky egg all of a sudden gains a real sense of menace and agency when it's got tentacles that it can whip around like that. And given that this thing is supposed to be 110 kilos and a full meter in length, that's kind of terrifying actually. This is a deceptively effective design. Clink is very much a Pokemon of the paint a face on a normal object and call it a day school of Pokemon design, but the evolutions are where it gets interesting. Clink is literally just two gears, entirely normal gears, offset against each other, and that's it, really. The clever bit of craft I'll grant them is the green central orb on each one, acting as a big, appealing green clown nose for the design, essentially, which makes the creature a little bit silly. Meanwhile, the equilateral distribution of facial features give them an expression of a sort of permanent shock or bemusement. The fact that one eye on each face is an X is curious because, well, an X'd out eye usually indicates either unconsciousness or death, but combined with the ovoid mouth, the trick here is that it puts a unique feature at each corner of the face triangle, which allows for some pleasing asymmetry in their features as they rotate around each other. So yeah, it's a face painted on a regular object, but there are interesting things done with that face to make it visually engaging. Clank ups the asymmetry by attaching a huge gear to one side of the configuration and moving the face of one of the Clinks to the outer ring of that gear. It complicates the whole vibe of the critter by introducing geared turning speeds differentiated, which is clever use of animation to do some character design. Adding on top of that, Kling Clang finally then gets kind of biblically accurate angel with it. It adds a fourth gear with a red gem, which in turn spins a spiked metal circle that orbits the whole configuration in a way which is quite simply just threatening to look at. And there is something genuinely kind of brilliant about this. Clink evolves by simply adding more mechanical gears to its configuration, but as more and more gears and pieces are added, it also inherently starts to look stranger and more abstract and more powerful and more alien. I would pay good money to see Kling Clang get a Mega Evolution based on this logic, because that is very clever design work, especially from a starting point that's that simple. Tynamo is a cute little critter and genuinely a clever bit of character design. It's a baby fish, obviously, with its big cute round eye and wobbly little body, but the simple convenience of a yellow line sine waving across its body manages to perfectly communicate its electric typing, aided by the odd sparkle or star-shaped mouth that sits on its front. Yet, that mouth is also just a little bit uncanny, a little bit weird, leech-like, which foreshadows its evolution, because adorable little Tynamo becomes a motherfucking lamprey. And listen, I know that all animals have a place in our ecosystem, but lampreys are some of the best evidence in nature that there is no God and we are being digested in the stomach acid of an amoral universe. They are literally just tubes with mouth on them whose only purpose is to gnaw and bite and scrape and consume. The very darkest nightmares of man could not have conceived of a more perfect creature to embody evil or Silicon Valley tech CEOs. Anyway, Electric is probably someone's favorite Pokemon somehow, and in fairness, the design is reasonably solid on the craft front. The fins and tail balance, the tube-like body, and the markings down the side and counter shading creates visual interest that makes the creature interesting to look at. That then is resolved into Electros, which manages to get away from the lamprey aura a little bit by adding a sleek, dramatic fin to the head that gives it a genuinely streamlined vibe, and complicating the feeding tube body by adding arms with something like hands on them. It's still a mildly horrifying creature to look at, but now it's also honestly, well, if not for the giant silly O-ring mouth, it would look kind of cool, actually, a little bit badass even. It's solid design. All of that then comes to a head in Pokemon ZA, which gave this a mega form, wherein it takes on the aspect of another of the worst animals in the ocean, the hagfish, extruding a thick slime with which it forms two false electrics on either arm to use in battle. And I have to admit it, this looks cool as hell. The dark base color of Electros against the pure white of those slime arms is just really impactful high contrast work, and the flame-like yellow markings on its side just makes it look badass. It never quite gets away from having that ridiculous O-ring mouth, but somehow, against all odds, this Pokemon makes lampreys look kinda cool. So, aliens. These Pokemons are aliens. The names are literally Elgem, or LGM, which is an abbreviation of Little Green Men, which is a sci-fi alien trope, and Beem, B-E-M, which is short for Bug-Eyed Monster, which is another sci-fi alien trope. Elgyem, though, despite the name, is designed much more after little grey men with its giant egg-like head and childlike proportions, and Bulbapedia has it that the multicolored gems on its hands might be a Close Encounters of the Third Kind reference, which, I mean, yeah, sure, I guess, why not, although it's not really obvious from the way they're put together. I do kind of like the line symbols on its head, though. First of all, because they're reminiscent of forehead wrinkles and draw attention to the forehead, which, hey, that lines up with the psychic type, but also because they're thick black geometric shapes call to mind the kind of geometric imagery that people will often claim as evidence of alien minds at work. Elgyem is fairly detailed as a first stage Pokemon goes, with lots of lines and shapes and odd volumes, but BEM takes it up another notch by complicating the head into a kind of space helmet shape, ramping up the forehead lines and gaining mask-like eyes and even literally putting a coat on. It thus escapes the childlike aspect of Elgyem to end up at something that looks decidedly more grown-up and cultured, if only by the simple convenience of adding fashion to the design, and it does make for a fairly effective evolution, I think. I can't say that I like LGM or BEM very much. They are a little bit too much B-movie extraterrestrial for Pokemon for my taste, but I can't say that they're bad designs either. Litwick is a simple little thing, but incredibly effective as design. It's a candle which is imbued with a sense of sentience by the simple expedience of it has an eye. Giving anything eyes is the fastest shortcut to making it seem alive, hence the astonishing power of sticky googly eyes for comedy. But the brilliance of this design is how everything else that makes Litwick feel alive emerges naturally from the simple property of melting wax. Its arms, melted wax droplets. Its mouth, melted wax droplet. And the cutesy little emo hair fringe over its eyes, you guessed it, it's melted wax again, baby. It's simple cartooning, but it invests these creepy little bastards instantly with a mischievous, adorable personality that makes them really appealing to look at, even if the Pokedex entries for this line are some of the darkest shit in the entire franchise. Lampent, then, advances technologically along with the advancement in evolution, becoming a lamp, and a fairly classic-looking one of the kind. It's the sort of gas-burning lamp you'd expect to see on a misty Victorian street in London or something like that, and again, the jaunty arms and pointy little hat along with the round bulb head gives it a disarmingly cutesy expressiveness, which again, according to the Dex entries, is very much how it gets ya. The eyes, though, especially in the 3D models, seem to be printed on the outside of the glass bulb, which for my money doesn't quite work. I really think the eyes should be floating embers inside of the lamp here. Being drawn on the outside like that does mean they lose a little bit of that sense of being supernatural ghost lights or creepy. Setting aside that minor complaint, though, this is a pretty perfect evolution from Litwick. And as Lampent is a technological step up from Litwick, so is Chandelure a technological step up, again being obviously a big elaborate chandelier. And here, the eyes being printed on the outside actually works for me because they are integrated into the decorative pumpkin lamp-like patterns on the chandelier itself. And this is paired with another escalation in intensity. Just like we went from a tiny candle wick to a single burning flame in a lamp, now we have gone to a full array of 4 burning candle arms with a powerful central flare. And this is really coherent design work, escalating the creature's power through escalations in its design, even if I do wish the chandelier arms were a little bit more like real chandelier arms, rather than the somewhat abstract wedges and swirls it's actually got. And it seems like Mega Chandelure heard me make that critique, because here comes King Ghost of the Haunted Castle. This is an escalation in technology, once again becoming a much more complex kind of lamp than the previous form. It's an escalation in flames and power, and it's an escalation in imagery, with the royal crown on its head, on top of which now the structure and construction of the chandelier is downright realistic, truly giving it the full impression of being a haunted, real object that something ghostly has taken possession of. The Litwick line is some of the straight-up smoothest and best executed design work in all of Pokemon, consistent and well-considered from start to finish, and I love it so much. Axew always surprises me a little bit by not being a pseudo-legendary. In Gen 5, that honor goes to Deino, but come on, look at Haxorus and tell me it doesn't deserve to stand side by side with Garchomp and Tyranitar. You can't. Anyway, Axew itself splits the difference on being kind of a baby dinosaur and kind of a fantasy creature. The head fin and coloration says dinosaur, but the bipedal baby bean body and big anime eyes, horizontal tusks, and the handkerchief-looking crest around its neck pushes it into something that's much more magical than real. It has the vibe, sort of some sort of hadrosaur, but only barely, and thus it ends up looking more like a mascot than anything, which is, in fairness, common for first-stage Pokemon. But it also does fit into kind of a Godzilla Jr. sort of child-friendly tokusatsu movie vibe, which is appropriate. Fracture ramps everything up a notch, abandoning most of the cutesiness in favor of adding a lot of spikes and sharp points to the design. Sharp shapes now appear on the head, around the neck, sharp claws on the feet and hands, a blood-red point on the tail, and it's all paired with the black sclera and blood-red eyes, so it's supposed to clearly be a lot more intimidating. Though to be honest, I can't really take the tusks seriously here. It's supposed to be these sharp, cutting mouth blades with blood-red stains on them, but it really just looks like either a very silly mustache or like it's got plain wings in its mouth and it's trying to take off. Especially the red marks on the end of the tusks just keep making me think of light commercial aviation. I just can't take it seriously. If the tusks were more properly integrated into its jaws rather than just being kind of stuck on there rather floatily, maybe it would work better, but yeah, I can't take Fracture seriously. I just can't. Haxorus, though. Oh, I take Haxorus seriously. Haxorus kicks ass. Haxorus is fucking awesome. It is fully Rule of Cool design, and it feels deeply kaiju-inspired to me, but this is one of those designs that just fully overrides the critical parts of my brain and activates my inner 10-year-old, to whom this is the coolest shit ever made by anyone. I want to see this thing fighting King Ghidorah and Godzilla. I want a team-up movie with Gamera and Mothra. I want it now. Trying to be critical, though, I do think it's a little bit of a pity that it abandoned the green color scheme from the pre-evolutions. That does disconnect from them a little bit. And similarly, it feels like Fracture is setting up for a more armored and bulky look, where Haxorus instead slims down and gets sleek with it, which, maybe that evolution line could go a little bit smoother, but I just don't fucking care, man. Haxorus is so fucking cool! Cupchew! Excuse me. Again. Cupchew is kind of gross, and I fucking love that. On a basic level, the character is just a teddy bear, right? Stuffy little body, cylinders for legs, round blob, ears and tail, and a head where you can practically see how the snout was sewed on. There is, on a design level, kind of not very much to it. But then it has a cold. Its head is ice blue, like a stereotypical freezing cartoon character, and it has this big, fat, dangling clump of pure snot just dripping out of its face. And the Pokédex takes some delight in all of this, letting us know that this thing will snort that mucus right back into its nose to spit it out as an ice attack, and that it will smear its snot on anyone it doesn't like because it's a little shit. I adore the grossness of this. It's cute to a certain kind of person, I'm sure, but to me, grossness is also an element that's often kind of missing from Pokemon. The reality of animals is that they are often kind of gross. They pee, they poop. My cat coughed up a hairball on my shoe the other day. The reality of living with Pokemon, of being a trainer, must therefore be that you have to deal with the gross stuff sometimes, as well as all the cool, fun adventure stuff. But the Pokemon games are most of the time just a power fantasy and are very content with not addressing any of the gross parts. Cupchew is a rare moment in which the games go, hey, actually, these things are animals, they are full of fluid and mucus and goop, and they're kind of gross sometimes, and I don't know, that just kind of makes me happy. There's a plausibility to that I appreciate. It's not so much realism as it's a kind of verisimilitude, which I think that Pokemon could kind of do with more of. Even Tamagotchi used to poop, but you never see anyone in the Pokemon world squatting by the side of the road to pick up after their Houndour. And think about it, maybe the reason why almost nobody has a team of 6 is because nobody wants to go around having to clean up after that many animals. Anyway, Beartic, the evolution is fine. It's just kind of a polar bear with long arms and a vaguely mountain-shaped head, where the gimmick is supposed to be that it has a big ice beard made from its own frozen breath, and if that ice beard had been made of drool, like from a big St. Bernard's or something, I think that would be a better evolution of the concept, or at least the ice beard should, as a design element, be bigger and stand out more, because as it stands, it just doesn't feel particularly unique or notable, and the beard doesn't really feel like it does anything for the creature on the design level, so I'm mostly interested in this line for the Cupchew, honestly. So, how do I feel about Cryogonal? Well, honestly, I kinda don't, really. This is very much one of those Pokemon that I routinely forget that they exist, and then when I'm reminded of them, I'm like, oh yeah, right, those guys. So, it's a snowflake, obviously. Specifically, it seems like it's a stellar plate snowflake, to me anyway, but I don't know that the kind of snowflake was a design consideration when they created the thing. Which is kind of a pity, really, when you think about it, because there's something like 80 distinct shapes and types of snowflake, all depending on the atmospheric conditions when the snow is forming, so if they had designed 3 or 4 different forms for Cryogonal, depending on where and how you encounter it, that would have made it a lot more memorable. But anyway, it's a snowflake with a pair of glowing eyes hovering inside of its body and 2 ice crystal chains that it can use to capture prey. In the 2D sprite, the triangular aperture for the eyes makes Cryogonal appear to always be kind of smiling mischievously, which is cute, but it doesn't quite carry over so well to the 3D model, where it very much depends on the angle that you're viewing it from. I guess the thing I'll say for Cryogonal is that I do kind of like the chunky geometric weirdness of them. Like, if you want to design a supernatural ice spirit that lives in snowstorms, yeah, sure, I can accept this as a design. It looks suitably alien and weird, even if it's not particularly inspired. There's just something rather unambitious about this design that makes them resistant to being memorable to me. Stunfisk is an absolutely ridiculous Pokemon design. It's this weird, misshapen brown lump with beady eyes and a weird beak, and possibly the most fucked up thing about them is that they still don't look nearly as weird as their real-life inspiration, Right-Eyed Flounders. Or, well, they probably draw inspiration from a few different species of electric bottom-dwelling fish, but my point is, however stupid this thing looks, the ocean has definitely come up with something dumber, so maybe we shouldn't judge it too harshly. And, in fairness, Stunfisk is supposed to be a little bit of a joke Pokemon, or at least the concept is supposed to be funny. It's this dumb-looking little living booby trap that gives you a big electric zap if you step on it, and the Pokedex has it that these little bastards even crack a smile whenever it happens, so you're clearly not supposed to take it too seriously. So, your mileage may vary. If you find this whoopee cushion of a character design a little bit funny, hey, mission accomplished, and if you don't, well, comedy is subjective, I guess. I do find the Galarian version to be the bigger misfire, though. The idea here is that this particular sadistic little bastard has evolved into a literal bear trap, and it adds insult to injury by having the Pokeball colors on its snapping jaws, presumably specifically to lure luckless 12-year-olds close enough that it can snap its jaws shut and, I guess, maim or drown them. A big electric shock is one of those cartoon injuries that feels like it could be funny, but this thing looks like it kind of has a body count, actually. It's also overall just kind of a messier design with the weird green footprint markings all over it. It loses the sense of being natural that regular Stunfisk gets from being earth-toned with yellow accents, and it just doesn't look as good, I think. Stunfisk is a design that only really works if you think it's a little bit funny, and I mostly don't think it's funny. You know what? I think purely on the metric of being an animal that looks like it does martial arts, Mienfoo is a superior design to Lucario. It looks more convincingly like an animal, for starters. It's a stoat on its hind legs, where Lucario has always had much more the vibe of a furry-style anthro. But design-wise, Mienfoo and Mienshao also deliberately use their fur and body shape to evoke the look of a recognizable martial arts aesthetic in a way that Lucario simply doesn't. So I think that if Lucario can get 2 Mega Evolutions based on different kinds of Super Saiyans, then surely Mienshao can get at least 1 based on some Naruto Tail Beast stuff or something. Like, come on, Game Freak. Anyway, that's enough rage-baiting the Lucario fans for engagement. My point is, Mienfoo is actually really solid design on the craft. Using the fur to imply the shape of a Kung Fu practitioner's robes is just solid and well-considered, even if I do wish that that fur was a little bit fuzzier around the edges. It does at times end up looking a little bit like folded flaps of skin instead. The big round forehead markings also have something of an animal aspect about them. It feels believably like something that a stoat would have in its coat pattern, and that helps make its slightly odd red and yellow color scheme feel not too plastic. Mienshao takes a sharp turn on that color palette, by the way, opting for a very placid off-white and purple instead. Once again, its use of the long fur to imply loose sleeves believably has that Kung Fu character design feel, and it's aided by the long whiskers and the, especially in the 2D illustrations and sprites, very elegant flowing line work on its head and face, mimicking some of the shape language of traditional East Asian ink illustration. If I have a complaint about Mienshao, it's that the design sort of feels like it loses its steam below the waist. Everything above the waist is flowy and slender and long and curvy, but the legs just end up being a little bit stubby and looking kind of silly, and it completely interrupts the flow of the design into the tail, and that's a bit of a pity. I think this design could really be something special if it kept a fully consistent flow across the whole volume of the thing, but instead, it just feels a little bit stop and start to me. Still, I do stand by what I said. This is a better martial arts design than Lucario, but that's because Lucario is actually trying to be a shonen protagonist. Druddigon is a weird one. On the one hand, most notably, it's a very spiky Pokemon with its triangle-dotted face and wings and the spikes all up and down its arms and legs and tail and the accordion fold on its stomach. But then, almost all of its actual body is actually designed with fairly standard, long, sleek lines and curves, which completely contradicts the spikiness of the rest of it. Its spiky, weird wings also just look kind of useless. Like, it really doesn't look like it should be able to fly with those things, and given that it is a cave Pokemon, which the Pokedex says mostly spends its time running through tunnels, well, I guess it's not supposed to fly, but then why does it have wings? I guess because it's supposed to be a dragon, and dragons have wings, so therefore, I don't know. Similarly, the color scheme. The body is mostly blue, the head and spikes are bright angry red, and then there's some neutral earth tone brown on the tummy, and it all just kind of clashes a little bit. It doesn't really feel like it's working together towards any particular purpose. And that's really the story of the whole Pokemon. It feels a little bit like it was just kind of put together from discarded pieces of other designs that weren't really meant to go together. Bulbapedia has it that it might be based on the red-headed rock agama lizard, which, I mean, I guess that sort of fits the color scheme, and Druddigon is said to like sunbathing like the agama do, so okay, but it doesn't really look like them at all in almost any other way. So yeah, I don't know. I guess if Gen 5's Pokedex is kind of supposed to be a remake of Gen 1's, then Druddigon is a sort of Lickitung style Pokemon. It's a weird, strange critter that doesn't really make any sense, but it's there to be a strange, wonderful thing that you can encounter into the world that deepens the sense of wonder and adventure. It's a dragon drawn with the weird, mismatched features of some 10th century illuminated manuscript, painted by a monk who's never been more than 2 miles from the Abbey, but someone told him a scary story about a monster once upon a time, and he's pretty sure that this is how it would look. And in that role, you know what? Yeah, I kind of like it. The weirdness kind of works for it. Every generation should have a weirdo that doesn't really look good in it, because that's just how ecology be sometimes. Golett and Golurk are one of those kinds of creatures that sort of stretch the definition of the word Pokemon, because they are actually automatons built by an ancient civilization, which, like, it's one thing to have an object that's possessed by a ghost be a Pokemon, but at some point you've got to draw the line, right? Like, if you threw a Pokeball at a Roomba, would that catch it too? Would it be steel electric? At least with Rotom, the thing that you're actually catching is the ghost and not the lawnmower that it's possessing, you know? Anyway, griping aside, the story of the Golem is an old and immensely important Jewish tale, or set of tales, rather, about men made of clay who could be brought to life by a learned rabbi to protect the community in a time of need, with the occasional caveat that the Golem should be put to rest as soon as its need is past, lest it start causing trouble or even becomes the threat itself. And it does feel like there's something of that in Golurk, certainly, what with the hastily patched scar on his chest being in constant danger of erupting into a violent explosion. Basically, it's a consequence of allowing the thing to be wandering around unattended for 1,000 years. Golems would also usually be brought to life by a sacred word scrawled on their body or on a piece of paper that was inserted into their mouth, and that right-angled spiral on both Golett and Golurk does feel like it's a significant symbol inscribed onto them by their makers, so it does feel like that aspect is in there too. Outside of those mythological allusions, though, Golett and Golurk are just reasonably generic fantasy golems, mostly. Golett is definitely very cute with its little football body and stumpy legs, and I do like the light spilling out from inside of it as a design element, and the Tetris block eyes. It's very hard not to be charmed by this thing. Golurk, meanwhile, does have something kind of interesting going on with its smooth, jar-shaped main body, contrasted against the rougher geometry of its head and limbs, but the main interesting feature here is the patched-over scar on its chest. I do like that implies a long history of life and self-repair. Still, I just can't help but struggle to call them actually that interesting or that unique as designs for Pokemon specifically. Like, it really does feel like these could show up in any of 100 fantasy RPGs as creatures. It doesn't really feel Pokemon to me, as vague and subjective as that may be as a criticism. Mega Golurk, I will say though, is definitely much more of its own kind of thing. I still don't know if that thing is specifically Pokemon. It starts to feel a little bit more Gurren Lagann to me, actually, but it definitely doesn't feel just generic. One very interesting thing about Mega Golurk is that while the idea here is that its internal power is on the very verge of a catastrophic detonation, the shape that power takes is shackles and bindings and restraints, and that is some interesting storytelling. The greatest expression of its power is one of being bound and effectively enslaved. You could read that quite tragically if you wanted to. I doubt that Pokemon was trying to go for anything quite that poignant with this design feature. I suspect it's just kind of meant to look cool, but it does give us something to think about. And mission accomplished on the looking cool part, because it really does. Pawniard is a Pokemon that visually reads to me like it should be a bug type with its segmented body and smooth shell, and the Dark Steel dual typing just kind of keeps catching me out. That's not a criticism, necessarily, just an observation that the way that Pokemon stylizes insects has some overlaps with other visual ideas. But no, Pawniard seems to be something more along the lines of a tokusatsu character, drawing some inspiration from historical Japanese armor and weapons, and organizing themselves in the sort of gang units you would be right at home seeing Kamen Rider fighting on a weekly basis. They have foot soldiers of the bad guy energy, basically, which seems to be also exactly what they're supposed to have, going by their Pokédex entries. I'm not entirely sold on their weird little arms. I feel like those could look more blade-like than needle-like, but I do like the tooth-like rows of blades on their torso and the blade on their helmet. Those are the kinds of weapons that kind of demand that you throw yourself physically at the enemy, no matter the danger to yourself, which, again, is perfect henchman energy and matches the dark type too, which is often very evil-coded. Bisharp takes all of this to a very natural next step, looking 100% like something that a Super Sentai team would have to fight 5-on-1. And with its upright posture, wide shoulders, and golden helmet blade, it does have something of an air of command or leadership about it. If Pawniards look a little bit interchangeable and anonymous, this thing looks like it wants to stand out and be a little bit more special. 4 generations later, all of that is then concluded with King Gambit. It continues the wide shoulders, adds more gold to the color scheme, and fully adopts a samurai general or daimyo aesthetic in a dignified sitting position from which it directs its minions. Famous samurai helmets were legendarily ostentatious and decorative to mark them out on the battlefield, and they included sometimes big ornate moustaches, which is used to great effect here, and also to add extra blades. It definitely looks by far the most human in a costume-like of the whole line, and it is in the human-like egg group, so I guess that makes sense. But also, interestingly, it looks perhaps the most bug-like as well, with the big shell across its back and the blades acting visually like horns on a beetle. Honestly, if there's a knock against King Gambit, it's that it goes so over the top that it looks more like Bisharp's Mega Evolution than a regular evolution. It's a pretty far escalation compared to the jump from Pawniard to Bisharp, but I'm generally of the opinion that a lot of Mega Evolutions would be better as regular evolutions, so I'm not gonna hold that against it. The Gen 5 Pokédex is in many ways kind of a soft remake of Gen 1, but even with that in mind, Bouffalant feels a little bit too much like Taurus 2.0. Granted, there is only so much you can do with a bovine body morphology like that, but it does feel to me like Bouffalant's design is missing something. The giant afro and gold rings around the big horns are good, those are interesting visual elements, but I kind of wish the rest of the body had something going on as well. An interesting fur pattern, perhaps, or a take on the big hanging mats of fur that you get on the American bison that inspired it, just anything. Bouffalant's whole thing is that it charges and headbutts things, so the whole design is focused around that. And again, I can't help but be like, okay, so maybe you could buff up its forelegs, or give it a bigger jaw or something, or hell, what if it didn't have a visible face at all and the whole head was just hidden in the hair? Wait, actually no, I just tried editing the art to look like that, and this actually looks kind of scary. Never mind, you're right, Game Freak, it needs to have a visible face. Still, no matter how I slice it, Bouffalant just feels like one of those designs that's missing something. It's got a solid central idea, but all of the creativity is in the head, leaving the entire rest of it just kind of boring. Rufflet is a perfect little bird. Look at him! Look at his giant feet! Look at his big fluffy head! It's very much a Pokemon that follows the classical Pokemon design formula. Normal animal plus fantastical feature equals Pokemon. In this instance, that fantastical feature is the single sharp red-rooted pinion on the forehead. It's the sort of feature that looks, yeah, sure, like this could be a natural plumage thing, but it's also so specific and graphically distinct that you sense the hand of a designer in it. It looks like a creature of the world, but also like something that's a little bit special. If there's a main criticism against Rufflet, of course, it's that it doesn't evolve until level 54, which, if you catch it on Route 3 in Pokemon Sun, well, have fun with that grind. Anyway, Rufflet is a good, precious little bird, but also, let's be honest, it's not anything super special. It's just a good bird, and you can say much the same about Braviary, honestly. It follows on from Rufflet in that the fantastical feature is that mask of dramatic white feathers, which undeniably gives it huge predatory cool bird factor, which is not to be dismissed. But once you turn your attention to the rest of the body, well, for one thing, its wings are kinda dinky. Pokemon's house style simplifies and stylizes bird wings a lot out of necessity, but especially for a big, powerful bird of prey, complex, multi-layered, and large wings are a huge part of what gives them their appeal and aura. With wings here being mostly monocolored with no patterns or textural layers, yeah, they just look a bit dinky. It's not such a huge issue on most bird Pokemon, but Braviary really feels like it could have benefited from a more impressive pair of flyers. Also, compare and contrast its dynamic leaned forward pose from the 2D sprite to the 3D model, and yet another victim of the third dimension. Hisuian Braviary seems to want to address some of this, getting a more complex pattern of feathers on the wings, a better posture, and changed body shape, and it really does help quite a lot. The change to psychic type and the psychic eye mask and the huge puff of hair I feel somewhat ambivalent about. That's a side grade for me at best, but its general physique feels a lot better. The wings look more impressive, and I really wish that they would backport some of those changes to be reflected in the original as well. I do enjoy myself an ugly Pokemon design, and Vullaby and Mandibuzz are prime examples of the form. And I say ugly, not in the sense that they are bad, but in the sense that nothing in these designs is trying to be pretty. And if I can soapbox for a second, that's actually an important quality to know how to appreciate, because a lot of media takes it as a given that being pretty is the highest aspiration of design, and down that road lies the death of art itself. Yeah, anyway, Vullaby. I always assumed that it was wearing a cracked eggshell Togepi style, like it was freshly hatched, but no, that's a skull that it's wearing, and if you turn the art upside down, it's a skull that looks a little bit human, actually, which I hope that's not someone's missing 10-year-old that vanished on their Pokemon journey. Yeesh. Not gonna lie though, the fact that it is a skull does make the design like 3 times better for me. You just don't get that level of morbid in a lot of Pokemon design outside of like Cubone. It's unique, it's a little bit dark, and it makes it special. Besides the skull, Vullaby is mostly, well, an ugly little hatchling with a pink naked head, useless wings, and a spiky collar, and a hair tuft that gives it some real mean 9-year-old energy, and a real sense of personality as well. Nasty personality, granted, but still. Mandibuzz then brings all of that home by upgrading from mean 9-year-old to the mean 9-year-old's much meaner mom, menacing with her perfectly winged makeup and wearing an apron carved from the bones of her enemies. She's the kind of lady to bring an amazing casserole to the potluck, but then call you fat when you have a second helping. That's the energy that I'm getting. And once again, the design is deliberately quite messy. Lots of spiky, jagged shapes going every which way, contrasted against the smooth curves of the head and the neck. And of course, there's bright flamingo pink bursting out of dull plain browns and grays. Again, it is ugly, but deliberate about it, and it coheres into a design with a lot of gleefully menacing and really mean energy. This is a Pokemon where I would be very curious to see what a Mega evolution would look like, though I'm not holding my breath exactly that she'll get one. Heatmor and Durant are not evolutions of one another, obviously, but they are so closely connected that I kind of do need to review them together. And Heatmor, I kind of adore, actually, if only for the absolutely amazing shape of its head and its 110% done with your shit expression. There's just something charming about a Pokemon whose ground state of being is to look like it hates every word out of your mouth. With the strange pipes coming asymmetrically out of its belly and running along its back, terminating in that strange combination tail and breathing tube, Heatmor is also just bizarre. Not on first inspection, but once you look closer, there's enough of a techno-biological fusion going on here that it looks a little bit like something H.R. Giger might design if he illustrated for a children's book. The bright red and yellow markings on its body then finishes off that weird industrial vibe by looking like nothing so much as a kind of boiler suit or protective fire suit almost, giving Heatmor less the vibe of an animal and more a sort of industrial worker from some bizarre biotech future. And all of that finds some context in Durant, the single most hateful-looking evil little son of a bitch to ever emerge from the pen of Ken Sugimori. This thing looks like it hates you. It hates you, it hates your family, it hates your dog and your friends and your town, and it hates the ground that you dare to stand on. It looks like every moment of its life it's taken up with fantasies of the pain that it will inflict on anyone who so much as looks at it wrong. This comes from the sharply squinting red eyes, yes, but it's also those crinkled, sharp-tipped legs that look like they were designed to painfully stab anything that it steps on. It comes from the red being the only color in a otherwise completely gray color scheme, and it comes from the repeated motif of snapping jaws not only in its jaws, but also in the joints and welds between its sheer metal armor plates. It looks like even if you cracked its armor open, the edges are designed to cut and shear and mangle you for achieving it. This is the prey that Heatmor has to hunt to survive, so no wonder its expression looks like that all the time. No wonder evolutionary pressure turned it into a freak of nature with a tongue that's constantly on fire, because imagine having to fight entire colonies of Durant every day just to have lunch. Heatmor is a victim of evolution, a bizarre, tragic freak of nature, and Durant is the purest visual distillation of evil in the entire Pokemon franchise. They are both perfect. Dino is an adorable little tyke with a bowl cut and a silly grin, and yet despite how cute it looks, it is classified as the irate Pokemon. The Pokedex does say that its main way of interacting with things is to bite them, but I don't know, I've had friends who are like that, and they're usually just neurodivergent. Anyway, as a design, its main features are the goofy bowl cut head with that big hair spike on it and the frizzy mane with pink spots. The mane does give it kind of a messy kid who spilled food all over themselves vibe, and that helps the little thing stay adorable. Its body, and especially its legs, are almost comically oversimplified, though. It's just these little stumps with wedges for feet, but the torn-off tail on the rump, well, that does imply a life that's involving some level of violence and harm. Svilas goes then a bit darker from there. Or, well, first it copy-pastes another identical head onto its body, making it look like half of a band that's supposed to go on the Ed Sullivan Show and change music history forever. But besides that, the body of the creature takes on a much more angular and hard-edged look, as well as gaining these red-ribbed belly stripes. Add to that these jagged fur strands coming out of the back, behaving a bit like wings, but too insubstantial to fly with, and the addition of sharp teeth to its mouths. And then, yeah, the whole thing does look a lot scrappier now. It looks more predatory, and certainly like it could do a lot more harm. This all then takes rather a leap to Hydreigon, which, if anything, looks more like a ghost than a dark type. Its tail is torn and almost looks like it's rotting, its legs have been ripped to shreds, and its wings on its back look ragged. Its main head has pitch-black eye sockets with a single red light inside of them, while the heads on the ends of its arms have completely empty eyes, as though there is no consciousness animating them. It's all rendered in the usual cutesy Pokemon style, of course, but if this thing looked the least bit more realistic, this would very quickly read as a horror design. And certainly, the Pokedex bears this out, describing the Pokemon as a malevolent, evil-minded destroyer of everything it comes across, with the Pokedex of Scarlet and Violet speculating that perhaps it became this way because people in times long past loathed it, considered it to be evil incarnate, and attacked it relentlessly, which, yeesh. Still, where Dano and Svilas make for a natural and smooth evolution line with one another, Hydreigon does go off a little bit too wild for me. It doesn't feel like an evolution of the line so much as it feels like a dark, shocking twist on the line, like something someone would cook up in a scary campfire tale. I think if Hydreigon was a ghost type and actually was supposed to be a scary, vengeful specter rather than just, a nasty dragon, it would work a lot better, but this is still supposed to be, an animal, essentially. And where Dino and Svilas look alive and vital, this thing ultimately looks kind of dead. Larvesta is a fire bug type Pokemon and seems to be based on a moth larva, although with the swept forward haircut and bright blue, rather humanoid eyes, there's also something distinctly unbug-like about it, a certain vibe of intelligence that you maybe don't get from the more animalistic bug designs. And with the flame-shaped 5-point star poking out of its mane, it definitely also has something a little bit geometrically uncanny about it. Combine that with the Pokedex entries that keep invoking concepts of mythology or being born from the very sun itself, and, it reminds me of how in real life, people have often grasped for divine explanations to explain why certain insects look as bizarre and colorful as they do. It feels like a plausible kind of folk mythology that would develop around this creature, especially when it apparently does make its evolution cocoon of actual real fire. Larvesta really doesn't have much going on besides its impressive head, though. The body is just a dull, regular brown, an unremarkable little grub body, which to me invites the idea that maybe all the bright colors and complexity up front are mostly just a show meant to scare off predators, while the creature itself is actually just a grub like any other. On the other hand, the evolution Volcarona does get a lot more explicitly supernatural with it. Hovering in the air with a spread of 6 wings behind it, yeah, that definitely has something of a seraphim about it, and its seated posture with that big regal cloak and those horns like a royal mask about its black head, Yeah, it looks actually less like a bug and more like some kind of nature spirit. Or if you blew it up to building size, this would be a kaiju straight out of a Mothra movie. And whatever else you can say about them, Larvesta and Volcarona do look unique. They have a nature and design which is all their own, close enough to real nature to look like animals, but fantastical enough that they are unmistakable as Pokemon. I don't think I've ever liked them very much. For whatever reason, they're just not really to my taste. But still, I can't pretend that these are not good designs. We're closing in on the end of the Gen 5 Pokedex, and you know what that means. It's time for movie tie-in legendaries. And Cobalion is definitely one of those. It, along with the 3 other members of the Swords of Justice, are based, at least according to Ken Sugimori, on the 3 Musketeers, with Cobalion being a stand-in for Athos, the oldest of the group, which... As design, the whole group takes its cues from hoofed animals, gazelles, goats, horses, oxen, that sort of thing, with Cobalion looking, I guess, a little bit more on the antelope side of things. The dark crest on its head, from which the horns spring, seems to be meant to imply sort of the shape of a hat pulled sharply down over the eyes. Its legs seem to essentially be wearing boots, and the mane of fur on the front sort of stands in for a cravat or some such neckwear. So the musketeer inspiration is certainly in there, like I can see it. And so I guess it's successful in that sense, even if especially the boots on its feet just look fundamentally kind of silly. It's like a dog wearing booties. It's an ungulate with flat feet. The real trouble for me, though, is that all of the Swords of Justice Pokemon are movie-ass Pokemon. They are designed to be specific characters within a specific narrative first, and designed to be Pokemon very much second. They look like characters. They don't look so much like creatures. If you've watched the movie and loved it, especially when you were a kid, probably this design will hold some appeal for you, but this just isn't what I want from Pokemon. And even if it was, I just can't get over how dumb those boots look on its feet. It just looks like it got into a dumpster behind a shoe store. It looks like a gazelle trying to cosplay. And this is a lesser gripe, but if Unova is technically supposed to be inspired by New York City and the US, why would you design 4 legendaries to reference French literature? I know the Americans are uncultured, but they have produced some media figures you could use. Did you at least consider Paul Bunyan? Terrakion, yeah, whatever, is the second member of the Swords of Justice, being based on the character of Porthos from the 3 Musketeers. Apparently. Like the rest of them, this is a movie character designed for a movie, and thus its design prioritizes its function as part of a character dynamic with Virizion, Cobalion, and Keldeo over having a particular coherence as a Pokemon. Specifically, Cobalion is the leader, Virizion is the agile, slender, quick one, Keldeo is the new kid rookie, and Terrakion is the big guy, which is also the role that Porthos plays in Alexandre Dumas' novel. The horns and unusual head crest seem calculated to mimic the shape of a musketeer's hat somewhat, as well as providing the swords it needs for its role. And, much like Cobalion and Virizion, it also has boots on its feet, which look, well, maybe a little better than Cobalion's, but not by much. There's some design elements of an ox in here, or maybe a bulldog or a goat or something. It's all a little bit all over the place, but the main thing that it's trying to communicate is big guy who charges you, and it does accomplish that. Whatever else, the design does read in its intended manner. I just don't think it's any good. The horns look flimsy, not powerful. The boots look silly. And it is weird that when it opens its mouth, that mouth is rendered with essentially human teeth, something that just feels uncanny to look at. This is a movie character designed to fill a movie role in a movie. It is functional, but it's not interesting, and it's not good Pokemon design. Also, this may be the candidate for the single worst Pokemon Home 3D key art in the entire franchise, because good god, it looks lopsided. What happened here? Virizion is the 3rd member of the Swords of Justice legendary quartet, and plays the role of Aramis in that group's emulation of Alexandre Dumas' 3 Musketeers. Aramis is the Lothario of the group, the romantic dreamer and the best, most agile fencer, which Virizion emulates with a fairly sleek and slender design, a head crest and horns in decorative shape, and a single feather, leaf coming off of its neck, like the romantic swoosh of a scarf or a neckerchief. Like Cobalion and Terrakion, it's also wearing boots on its legs, although unlike its companions here, they are executed subtly enough that you could confuse them for hooves, which is a big improvement. It remains, nonetheless, a movie-ass Pokemon, which is to say that it's a design whose purpose is to function in a movie narrative and as part of character dynamics with other movie characters, and it is not so much designed to be a part of the ecology or mythology of any Pokemon region or culture. Virizion isn't an indigenous creature in Unova where you might find herds of them running around, but it also isn't some mythological nature spirit or embodiment of a divine concept. The main thing that it is trying to get across is, I am the slender, quick one in the group that I am a part of, and while it does accomplish that, it just isn't saying or doing basically anything else. Among the older Swords of Justice, Virizion is the best looking of the bunch, and certainly the most plausible design as an animal, but that is clearing a very low bar, and I just cannot bring myself to care about this thing outside of its movie role. The forces of nature minus an Amorous. For a region that is supposedly based on the US, they are an odd choice of legendaries, being that these are based on very, very Japanese gods and very Japanese divine aesthetics. Ken Sugimori has stated that Tornadus and Thundurus are based on Fujin and Raijin, respectively, a pair of rather famous Shinto weather gods, while Landorus was designed to be a god of the land, though Sugimori does not specify which, if any, actual deity served as the inspiration, and I don't know enough about Shinto to speculate. Still, looking at period artwork of Fujin and Raijin, it is easy to see the inspiration coming through, and I mean, that is kind of cool, I guess. All three of them in their base form take basically the same shape, being the upper half of a humanoid with horns, Magatama markings on their body, and a big mustache, emerging from a cloud with a stern, cross-armed posture. The main differentiators are their colors, their hairstyles, and their tails, which curl about them dramatically to differentiate their silhouettes. Their incarnate forms, thus, are mostly focused on emphasizing the unity between them, that all three of these are of the same kind, share a similar purpose, which is to control and embody the forces of nature. But then there's the Therian forms, added in Black and White 2, which are almost the exact opposite. These are extremely different and individual, and rather than reflecting a common shared nature, instead it reflects their distinct individual natures. So Tornadus is a big bird-like beast with broad wings and savage claws, Thundurus is a horned dragon, something like a Qilin perhaps, while Landorus takes after a lion dog, I think, with maybe a little bit of manticore in there. The unifying feature of clouds, mustaches, and Magatama markings remain, but they are no longer the point of the design. To me, this kind of feels like the incarnate forms would be their divine forms, how they appear in the realm of heaven or whatever, while the Therian forms are avatars that they take on to go fuck shit up in the mortal world, or at least that feels like a mythologically plausible interpretation of their designs. It's hard to say how I would rate them as designs, though. On the one hand, they are unique, they have appropriately mythological context from the real world, and their Therian designs especially make them plausible as mythological Pokemon spirit deities. On the other hand, they also feel, well, first of all, like I said, they are kind of an odd fit for Unova, the kind of sort of American region, although in fairness, so are Reshiram and Kyurem, but also, they feel rather disconnected somehow from the vibe of Gen 5 as a whole. It's hard to define, and I can't pin it down into a coherent intellectual argument, but I see these guys and I just instinctively feel like, yeah, these guys are inessential. Like, if you never caught them or knew about them, I don't think that would be a big hole in your Pokemon knowledge. I don't think you would really be missing out on very much. Still, that's just vibes, and since I can't make an actual argument for it, I'm not going to dock them a grade on that. As designs, they achieve what they're trying to achieve, so let's call it a solid B. It is time to look at the box legendaries for Gen 5, and well, for a series called Black and White, what else was there to do but reference the Tao? If you are familiar with Taoism at all, you are familiar with the yin and yang graphic, black and white swirling in a circle, each with an orb of the other at their head. Now, I am not a Taoist or an expert on the religion, but to my layman's understanding, it is a philosophy of understanding the world that is grounded in dualities. The fundamental nature of the universe can be understood as a push and pull between a pair of dualities which are at once complementary and opposite to one another. Each side of the duality contains and encircles the other, and your job as a person is to find a balance between them. So, male and female, nature and civilization, summer and winter, the land and the sea, and so on and so on. Not exactly binaries, but more like harmonies. Thus, Reshiram is yang, the white side of the symbol, and its design is a complementary opposite to Zekrom. Where Zekrom is smooth and hard, Reshiram is spiky and soft. Where Reshiram flows and billows, Zekrom is stiff and delineated. Reshiram is organic and animalistic, Zekrom is inorganic and kind of robotic. And yet, they are complementary. They share a basic body plan, they both have wings, they both have crests on their heads, they both are dragons, and they both have tails in suspiciously similar shapes. In fact, it almost kind of looks like Zekrom's tail would fit inside of Reshiram's tail, which... well, I'm sure someone's drawn fan art of that. The duality of the box legendaries seems calculated to match the duality of the game's narrative. Pokemon being free in nature versus being bonded to trainers, which is the conflict between the player and N as well. And just as yin and yang are not actually opposites, so it turns out that Reshiram and Zekrom are actually two parts of a whole, and so it turns out that Pokemon can be free and be bonded to trainers at the same time, no matter how many of them you dump in your PC box to rot forever, you monster. So, is Reshiram any good as a design, then? Well, yeah, it's a big, imposing, sheer white dragon. It's kind of hard to go wrong with something so stark and striking. I think it suffers a little bit from marketing design. Like, because it is a box legendary, it has to look superficially cool and elaborate and powerful, and a lot of the details and features on design feel motivated by that more than they feel motivated by a desire to express a Taoist duality. It's a design that ultimately reads as kind of messy and maybe a little bit too eager to impress. I might have liked both it and Zekrom to be simpler and more abstract, more like embodiments of concepts than embodiments of power, but that is the perspective of a man in his 30s, and these games are ultimately designed for children who definitely think that this is way cooler. And I can't say that they're wrong. As we discussed with Reshiram, Zekrom is designed after the yin and yang, the central symbol of Taoism, two forces that are opposite and yet complementary. It is a duality, each half of which swirls around and contains the other, and between this duality, all things must attempt to find balance and harmony. Thus, Zekrom is yin, the black side of the symbol, and its design is a complementary opposite to Reshiram. Where Reshiram is spiky and soft, Zekrom is smooth and hard. Where Zekrom is stiff and delineated, Reshiram flows and billows. Zekrom is inorganic and robotic, Reshiram is organic and animalistic. And yeah, okay, I'm copying my script directly from the Reshiram review here, but that's because my reviews are also a duality between which all things must attempt to find balance and harmony, whatever. Zekrom is, I think, in isolation, the better design of this duo, mostly because where Reshiram is all feathers and fur spikes and billowing and thus a little bit messy, even if intentionally, Zekrom is much more organized and specific and makes for a much clearer silhouette and body plan. It immediately feels more readable and coherent and comprehensible, and therefore it feels like it was the product of a more disciplined design process. But the trouble is, Zekrom doesn't really work in isolation. In fact, in isolation, it does just kind of look like a fairly generic dragon monster from literally any RPG or fantasy franchise. It could be a Yu-Gi-Oh card or a Digimon, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it turn up in a Breath of Fire or Tales game, or hell, in an episode of a Super Sentai show. There's something tokusatsu about this thing. Without Reshiram to contrast and contextualize it, Zekrom isn't really anything special. Its plain black color scheme is really just mostly shades of gray with very low contrast, and there just isn't really anything here for the eye to focus on except the occasional electric glow from its tail and stuff. And that glow does look cool to a point, but sometimes it also makes it look more like a toy that comes batteries not included. By contrast, Reshiram in all its glorious mess feels much more specifically Pokemon-like, and because it is so bright, it simply just is literally more memorable because you can see more of it. So I would rank Zekrom over Reshiram if they were completely separate designs from completely different games. But I wouldn't rank either of them really that highly on their own. They only really work as a pair, because the reality is that these aren't two designs. They are one design split across two Pokemon, which, I mean, you see what I'm getting at here, is probably just about the single most perfect way that you could possibly represent a Taoist duality in character design. So on its own, call Zekrom's grade a B, like I gave to Reshiram, but put the two of them together, and together, they get an S. After Reshiram and Zekrom established a very strong duality in Pokemon Black and White, then there came the problem of what exactly are you gonna do for a direct sequel? In Ruby and Sapphire, you could just kind of add Rayquaza to the sky as another legendary in addition to the land and sea, but you really can't just shove another thing into Yin and Yang. The fact that there are only two things in it is sort of the whole point of the thing. So, there is a concept in Chinese philosophy called wuji, and I am very much relying on Wikipedia here, not an expert. In Taoism, this essentially indicates, I guess, emptiness, but also infinity or the total absence of being. The point is, in a Taoist duality, wuji is kind of sort of the infinite emptiness that contains the duality. And look, it's way more complicated than that, and I would love for actual Taoists to add their perspective in the comments, but Kyurem, the Pokemon that this short is about, Kyurem, seems to be meant to represent this containing emptiness, symbolized by its ability to fuse with or absorb Reshiram and Zekrom, and also possibly by its ice type, what with Reshiram and Zekrom being fire and electric, which are forms of energy, while cold is essentially a lack of energy. As a design, Kyurem reflects both Reshiram and Zekrom, sharing bits of its body plan with both of them. It has a bit of Reshiram's spikiness, a bit of Zekrom's geometric hardness, and a similar tail, but it also looks, well, kind of rough, really. It's a bit dull and naked, either damaged or unfinished, and it is, of course, gray, which is the halfway point between black and white. Obviously, this is the point. Once it fuses with either of the two other legendaries, that is when it begins to look a bit more cohesive. And yet, in both black and white forms, Kyurem remains asymmetrical. Bits and parts of its body will be covered in ice in irregular patterns, meaning that even fused with one half of the duality, it still looks sort of half-finished, not quite cohesive. More powerful, yes. More complete, yes. But not entirely. And again, this makes some sense, as the game suggests that Kyurem is what was left over when one legendary dragon split itself into Reshiram and Zekrom, and so in order to be finished, it would need to fuse again with both of them, which is something that has not, as of yet, been made possible in any game. Within a Taoist framework, I guess this is sort of making the point that the emptiness can contain the duality, but it cannot be one with it, that unbalancing the relationship between duality and emptiness leads to an incomplete apotheosis, or possibly to corruption. Again, Taoists sound off in the comments for this. For our purposes, though, as designs, well, absent context, Kyurem looks straight up kind of bad, honestly. It's just kind of a mess, a generic dragon body shape with jagged nonsense all over it. In either fused form, it looks better, but also still unfinished and unbalanced, which, you know, yeah. So on its own, call Kyurem a C in all of its forms, but again, in context with the other legendaries, the group still gets an S. So, we've been talking about Pokemon Black and White and the box legendaries that define the franchise, and you can go back and watch those videos for further context, but TLDR, they are designed to embody a Taoist duality, the yin and the yang, the black and the white. Now, Taoist philosophy is sort of an odd choice for a Pokemon region based in some part on the humding or home of hamburgers US of A, but I think the choice of legendaries has more to do with what the narrative of Black and White is trying to do than with the region, because these games are the franchise trying to harmonize a pretty stark and uncomfortable duality that has always existed within it. The narrative and text of every Pokemon game is that Pokemon and humans are friends and companions. They live and work together in harmony, making a better and more joyous world for everyone. But the gameplay of every Pokemon game is you forcing creatures who are captured by force and that do not have the option to disobey you to beat, burn, slash, poison, and laser blast each other into unconsciousness over and over and over again, and you are rewarded for doing it with money, fame, and status. Now, interpreting the Pokemon franchise as somehow endorsing dogfights or cockfights or animal abuse is to interpret the series in bad faith. That's why PETA does it. But the entire franchise was inspired by the hobby of insect fighting, which, no matter how you try to square it, is a form of animal abuse, just as surely as dogfighting or cockfighting or bear baiting is. The ludo-narrative dissonance, the conflict between what the narrative says and what the gameplay asks you to do, has always existed within the Pokemon franchise, and this is at least partly why the anime often made a point out of Pokemon agreeing to be caught or become the partner of protagonists like Ash, and emphasizes a personal friendship and caretaking alongside battling. But the problem is that catching and battling is the game. Game Freak can invent as many contests and Pokeathlons and minigames as they want. The core gameplay loop is and always will be fight, catch, catch. So the narrative of Black and White straight up just asks the question, hey, maybe Pokemon should be free. Maybe trainers shouldn't own them. It then turns around and answers that question by saying, actually, that question is being asked by an evil bad guy who's trying to take over the world, and Pokemon being bonded to trainers is totally good, actually, because you probably can't expect the franchise to actually concede that its premise has problematic aspects. But the legendaries and the Taoist themes are also a part of the argument that it's making. Yes, catching and battling is the opposite of willing partnership and peaceful cooperation, but like yin and yang, these opposites together form a whole. So long as each aspect is is held in balance, there is harmony. The gameplay says fight, catch, and the narrative says live together in peace and cooperation, and both of these things together form the harmonious whole that is Pokemon. A duality does not have to be a conflict. Now, your mileage may vary on whether you feel like this resolves the ludonarrative dissonance at the heart of the franchise. Certainly, I'm not entirely convinced that it does, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this is an interesting and compelling use of the design of the legendaries to address a theme, both visually and narratively. It makes Pokemon Black and White interesting to think and talk about, which is a quality that makes it compelling as art. Keldeo, the youngest of the Swords of Justice. Keldeo, like the other Swords of Justice, is a movie-ass Pokemon, which is to say that it is designed to be a character in a movie first, and a Pokemon a sort of distant second. On top of that, it is a protagonist movie-ass Pokemon. This is the underdog with a hero's journey, whom Ash and the gang have to help find its courage and complete its character arc over the course of the narrative, and the design is first and foremost concerned with facilitating that story. The Swords of Justice are all based on Alexander Dumas' The Three Musketeers, with Keldeo playing the part of young D'Artagnan, an aspiring musketeer who's eager to join the elite squad. So, being that protagonist, Keldeo is young and cute, a sweet little overeager colt with big eyes and a cute muzzle, but it's also hot-headed, represented by the big red mane on its head, and it is impatient, as you can see in the sprite animation and the restless artwork. There's a conflict shown here, perhaps, between its bright red mane and then the cool blue tail and musketeer's doublet on its body. The implication here is that there's a conflict between its uniform and its personality, which again bears out in the movie, where Keldeo is an overeager young trainee who challenges Kyurem before he's ready and has to spend the movie working up his courage to face the dragon again. Once he does and masters his secret sword, that's when we get its resolute form, the apotheosis of its character arc when it has learned the lesson and transitioned into a more mature and developed state of character and truly become a Sword of Justice. Here, its uniform has extended, giving it a kind of heroic mask around the face, and the hooves have sharpened. The hairstyle is less wild and more directional, and of course, its dinky little unicorn horn is replaced with a big, powerful four-head sword with which it will challenge the mighty dragon. There's also a cute little detail of 3 feathers, each in the color of Cobalion, Terrakion, and Merizian, representing Keldeo's acceptance into their group. So, as a movie protagonist, Keldeo is actually pretty damn good design. Visually, it expresses its character arc and the narrative and the literary reference genuinely quite well. As a Pokemon design, on the other hand, well, it's better than the other Swords of Justice. It is at least plausible that Keldeo could be one example of a species, that there could be herds of Keldeos or adult Keldeos out there somewhere in the Pokemon world, but it's also just such a movie protagonist. This is a design that says, I exist to have a hero's journey, and not really a design that says, I exist because I am an animal or spirit native to the region of Unova. So, good movie design, but I don't think it's all that great as a Pokemon. Okay, we're coming up to the end of the Gen 5 Pokedex. Let's see what's next here. Hatsune Miku! Meloetta is your classic mythical Pokemon, being a highly collectible, very exclusive, event-only marketing gimmick designed to drive fan engagement with artificial scarcity. Okay, so maybe that's the absolute most cynical possible way to put that, but listen, we never got any of those goddamn events out where I live, and I have the right to be a little bit bitter about that. Now, Meloetta is a singer. Well, partly, but in her aria form, her hair is a literal note staff, her arms themselves are shaped and colored like notes on a note staff, and on the side of her head, she has what is essentially a kind of combination cute bow and hair ornament, but also a pop star's earpiece and close-mouth microphone. Meloetta's design thus walks a rather tight line where it does manage to successfully look like a kind of spirit of music, thus exempting it from the need to look like a member of a species as such, but it also looks so conspicuously modern with its visual references to technology that it can't quite come across as being, spiritually ageless and timeless. It feels not like a spirit of all music of all time, so much as it feels like a spirit of current music from right now, and I don't know that I think that really works. The pirouette form gets away with this better by getting rid of the microphone and turning it fully into a hair ornament on its now elaborate stacked hairstyle, and puffing the dress out into petals to emphasize spinning and dancing motions, which looks nice, but because it also loses the music staff with the notes in its hair, it also becomes less visually connected to music. I suppose they couldn't turn her hair into a dancer's step diagram, so fair enough, I guess. So, As a conclusion, Meloetta is a cute little thing, and the design does feel very Pokemon, so it's not as though it doesn't fit in the franchise, but it also feels like a design that was very focused on trying to be cute in a contemporary way. It feels very of its time and of its moment, which is probably fine for an event Pokemon, but I can't help but think that it could have been a bit better if it had tried to be more timeless. As the final entry in the Gen 5 Pokédex, Genesect is unsurprisingly a mythical Pokémon, available only as an event reward and promoted with a tie-in movie where it gets to fight Mega Mewtwo Y. Reading the plot synopsis, it actually sounds surprisingly kind of good, but I'm not watching a whole movie just to do this review. Let me know if it's good in the comments, maybe I'll check it out for the reaction channel. So, in narrative, Genesect is a fossil Pokémon, revived by an ambitious scientist of Team Plasma and substantially altered to become a perfect Pokémon, more specifically, a perfect weapon for Plasma, who quite literally install a goddamn energy cannon on its back. That cannon, then, supports Genesect's gimmick that it can change the typing of its signature Techno Blast move by holding different drive items, which... is that competitively viable? Like, can you fake out an opponent by deploying one with a type that they weren't expecting? Competitive viability probably isn't the point here, though, so much as it is a rule of cool character design and an attempt to create a cool merchandisable action figure character, which I will concede that they do manage. Which is also rather what the rest of the design looks like, ultimately. Genesect has some of that visual bug typing with its segmented body, thorax, and abdomen and so on, but much more than an insect, it looks like... well, it's supposed to look like steel, but let's be real, it looks like plastic. With its sleek, smooth lines and car grill and headlight mouth and eyes, it's very much operating on a tokusatsu sort of vibe, or maybe something the Transformers would fight on some sort of metal bug planet. All of this is to say, this doesn't look very much like a Pokemon, almost at all. This could be anything from any of 1,000 franchises, and to an extent, that is the point, of course. Narratively, this Pokemon is what happens when ambitious, selfish humans try to play God and make perfect creatures. What you get is superficially cool toy soldiers with no breath of life in them. So, yeah, it makes sense that they barely look like a Pokemon anymore. It is supposed to be that way. Thus, it is a successful design at what it tries to do. It is competent design for its purpose. And yet, I don't like it. I just don't. It's trying way too hard. It's trying so hard to be cool and whoa and robot body and headlight face and blaster, and I just can't get interested. This is a consequence of being in my 30s. I have reached the age when you start to enjoy bird watching and baking sourdough bread, and rule of cool laser cannons just don't hit the same anymore.
It'll happen to you.